All right, we're going to call to order, whatever day this is, the May 10th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council, Redevelopment, Successor Agency, and Financing Authority. We're going to begin tonight as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'd like to ask our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight's going to be led by our former City Council member, Carolyn Castillo-Pearson. The council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our legal counsel regarding 2 items of exposure to litigation. No action was taken, and to confer with our labor negotiator regarding negotiations with all city bargaining units, and no action was taken. So with that, we're going to proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. As is noted on our agenda, we're prohibited by state law from taking action or having a discussion about items that are raised under item 1A, but it is an important opportunity for a public forum. We ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other agenda item this evening to please fill out one of the yellow cards that's available near the front door and turn it into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure everyone gets the chance to be heard, and to that end, we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart, and that simply indicates which agenda item the City Council is currently considering. We take the yellow cards at the clerk's desk up until the conclusion of the staff report on any particular agenda item. So for example, if you're here for item 12, when the staff is done presenting on item 12 and the council questions or the public comment have begun, we don't take any additional cards after that point. So please try to turn the card in as soon as you can, but definitely before the conclusion of the staff report. We also recognize that for some folks, speaking in public on a microphone and on TV can be a nerve-wracking experience, and we try to promote a little bit of neighborliness that allows everybody to have their voice to be heard. So we do ask that there not be any boos or demonstrations or applause or other disruptions, and that we allow folks to have a civil discourse here in the chambers. So with that, we have just one request to speak under item 1A, and that's by Ed Castorena.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. You know what I'm going to talk about, Bright Park. But more than that, I'd like to tell you a little story. When I went to school there, and that was Washington High, and that was connected to Bright Park. During the summer, the gym would be open. There would be teachers there, mentors, volleyball, all kinds of different things, basketball. And they really took their time, and we had something to do. I know there's nobody here perfect, and I certainly wasn't when I was a kid. But that really helped. Instead of getting into trouble, we were having things to do. And for that reason, I think we need to do more with Bright Park to help the kids that are in so much trouble now. They're looking at 30-year sentences for pizza crimes or something else. And I don't want to make light of that. Some of them are serious, but 15, 16-year-old kid, gets in trouble like that, he shouldn't be facing something so serious as that. So if we had mentoring, more things with the park, we turn an eye on that. It's hard for a lot of the kids over there now that the Washington baseball doesn't exist anymore, Little League. I think the price now is like $250 or $270. That makes it really hard on lower income children. I talked to Danny Velez, and he used to be the president of Washington, and he knows for a fact that a lot of the kids can't afford that. I just wish there was some program and some thought brought into this where the city could help, the school district, and maybe private donors or something that could work this out and help these kids. Again, Bright Park could be a central thing for all the kids to get some mentoring, have something to do there. The soccer is great. I mean, you can have as many as 1,000 kids because you have one team after another out there. And we need an adequate bathroom out there.
And we're going to have to
There's
bring it.
one stool.
We're going to have to bring it to a close.
Okay. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, that's our only request under item 1A, so we're going to proceed to item 1B, which is council communications. Are there reports or other communications this evening? Ms. Orozco?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several things to report on. Our City School 2x2 meeting occurred on April 24, 2017. I expect that Mr. Mayor might report on that line item, but we did do an outline of the Kids Home Run and discuss other issues during that meeting. I felt that it was very productive, but I'll leave time for Mr. Mayor to respond. One of the community, there was a community meeting on April 27, 2017 at Jack Rabbit Brewery that was organized by some of our community members, one of whom actually serves on one of our commissions, named Peggy Bell. It was an incredible success and a great turnout. Council members Ledesma and Mayor Pro Tem Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson were in attendance, as well as Supervisor Villegas. It was fantastic in that there were several different areas of West Sacramento that represented at this specifically Old West Sacramento defined meeting. But one of the line items that were discussed was an upcoming community picnic in Old West Sacramento at Memorial Park in conjunction with the West Sacramento Little League. And that's on May 20th from 11 to 3. So regardless of whether or not you live in Old West Sacramento or Southport or Bridgeway or Brighton Broderick, please come out and join us. Just bring an appetizer to share with the community. It is a great community building opportunity. Our Regional Sanitation Board met on April 26, 2017. We held a public hearing for the Regional Sanitation Consolidated Ordinance amendments and unanimously approved the amendments for sewer rate and impact fee increases over the next 5 years. On April 21st, 2017, Councilmember Ledeza and myself attended a tour at the Day Reporting Center. Beautiful building, had an opportunity to get an introduction of the services offered at the facility. Very excited about some of the high-quality services that the residents of West Sacramento who receive referrals can enjoy there. On April 21st, 2017, right down below us at the City Hall Galleria, the Yolo County Children's Alliance had their annual fundraiser. I think all who were in attendance could agree that it was a tremendous success with a great turnout and fantastic music. City County 2x2, there is going to be a presentation that will cover some of the items that we spoke about, specifically the homeless action plan, so I'll hold off on many of my comments, but we'll report that we received the homeless, at least a draft copy of the YOLO Homeless Count 2017, received some updated statistics on our Bridge to Housing program, and discussed, in addition to the homeless action plan, other potential programs that we can enjoy in our city, and I'll give a little bit more comments later when we have our homeless action plan presentation. Other than that, I understand that both Council Member Sandine and myself will be participating in the Habitat for Humanity Women's Build this Friday, representing the city of West Sacramento and doing something great for our community at the same time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Sandine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier this evening, the Port Commission met, and we approved the Port's proposed 2017-18 budget and the work plan. The work plan involves a large number of real estate activities, capital improvement projects, and lease management work. On April 20th, the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency met, and we heard a presentation on the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Program implementation strategy. And just yesterday, we celebrated the Southport project groundbreaking along with the city. Also, Congresswoman Doris Matsui, Colonel Ray of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Gary Bardini with the Department of Water Resources, and Clyde McDonald of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board were there. The mayor presided over the event, which was quite celebratory. And our city manager also acknowledged the great work of the staff and the contractors working on the project. And WSAFCO board member Tom Ramos commented about the relationship with the city in this important work. And Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson and Councilmember Orozco were also in attendance yesterday. And last week, I participated along with the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem in the annual Cap to Cap program of the Metro Chamber of Commerce in DC. I was pleased to serve as the program's honorary co-chair along with Council Member Stephanie Nguyen of Elk Grove. I attended a number of meetings with the Flood Protection Policy Team and spoke with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the House Appropriations Committee, the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Civil Works, the Office of Management and Budget, Congresswoman Matsui, and Congressman Barra about our regional flood projects and particularly our needs in West Sacramento to keep our levee improvement projects moving forward. So it was a pretty successful, I think, cap-to-cap program this year. We also, I think others will share other highlights from the program. Finally, along with Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson and Councilmember Roscoe, I participated in the Senior Resource Fair at the Community Center on May 5th and presented the Mayor's Proclamation for Older Americans Month at the event. It was really well attended and many information booths were set up throughout the center. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things to report on. First, this one won't take too long, so I'm not going to share some thunder, or steal your thunder. But on the 26th, there was a meeting of the Policy Steering Committee of the streetcar.
It's not my thunder. You go and give the whole report.
No, I wasn't in Washington, so I won't do that yet. But it was a very good meeting at that one, very concise, learning, getting a now very outdated funding update. But also, we went through in pretty much detail kind of where we are in the streetcar process. And the most important message we had out of that was staff at SACOG and the project team are working very diligently to keep us on track, keep us on schedule to all the project milestones we have coming up. So again, I know the mayor has an update to this in a few from his trip to Cap, but it was a good meeting, and I think all parties, we can say, are confident moving forward, and a lot of work still to be done. And then this past Monday, the 8th, had a meeting at the Yolo County Transportation District. It was a pretty robust meeting, actually. One of the items up for vote was our proposed route changes in West Sacramento. As you recall, was that a meeting ago? We got an overview of the route changes. We got an overview of the options, or at least the phases we have coming in under our mobility action plan. The district got a briefing of those. It was more in scope of the vote. They have to vote on the route changes, of course. But lots of questions, lots of good conversation they had about what we're trying to do in West Sacramento. This was couched right before, which I'll get to in a second, the budget conversation. So it was really timely that we all had it and engaged in terms of what our goals are in West Sacramento and to improve service, to add value to the which we all know is the bus service that we have through YOLO. Could always get better, and it's a large piece of infrastructure that we have to pay for. So we want to make it as efficient and as robust as we can. And through the actions we took and the workshop we had with staff on our route changes, they completely understood our route changes to make sure that we're still serving our customers well, that we're streamlining those routes to make it more consistent, more regular, and with everything we're doing through the Mobility Action Plan, our MAP plan, that it makes total sense that we're trying to provide more options for folks. So it was a really good meeting. I felt like all the board members are really appreciative of our proactive nature as a council on it to address these things. So I'll report back that they did vote very affirmatively. There's a couple of questions we laid. They are still looking into. The mayor suggested you were well represented, Mr. Mayor, by Mike Barnbaum. Yeah, was that right? Yeah. Who was recited all your requests for that, for what you're looking for. YCTD staff, though, is still looking into the possibility of Riverfront Shuttle. That continues. And we're also looking into, there were some questions about some route changes to even bus stop changes that I'll follow up with Public Works staff afterward to kind of pass that along with some questions whether or not we can streamline even more things that they had seen. So, but they voted for the affirmative, and again, we're really appreciative of our changes. Secondly was a conversation about the budget, the preliminary budget talks. And in that discussion, it's no surprise, there's a slight increase to the budget, to what's being asked from the cities, a 3.2% increase. But what we asked the district to do is to prepare a more concise budget arrangement so that it's very clear to us and to the other member agencies. Because of the shifting nature of transit, we have SB1 that just passed, so they're anticipating getting some dollars back. They're also looking at creating efficiencies, the moves we're making. We wanted to have a more concise look at the budget and kind of how the cities would be impacted. We're continuing to use one-time our reserves or one-time budget gap fills. And as you know, when we go through our own budgeting process, that's always a kind of, that can be not quite the way you want to do it. We had the money to do it, so I think we wanted to make sure, though, we had a good reserve policy to make sure all the cities and agencies understood what we're doing with those reserves. Two, we wanted to make sure everyone was aware without that what their allocation would be, because it wasn't quite clear in their budget request, because we do want to make sure everybody knows the real price it's costing us for these budget amounts. So again, I think you can look for, as this budget season goes on and we get closer to it, I think the other cities are starting to understand that I think the moves we're making, and trying to be proactive and making our routes and our transit system more efficient, something that they need to get a hold of too. I think the budget just screams at you, how can you make this more efficient? And so I'm looking forward to getting back into that discussion. I know there were some, I want to thank our staff because they gave me a good briefing before that meeting to make sure we had a good, robust conversation. And I think, again, we should come out pretty well at the end of this. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to elaborate on Councilmember Sandee's report on the Senior Resource Fair, there's about 35 tables that were represented from various nonprofits. About 150 seniors and families or caregivers were at this event, and some of the information that was coming out of these questions that the seniors had, we also had AARP presence there as well, was, for example, how do I recognize fraud? How can the city or other nonprofits help me take care of my yard? Where can I get a free telephone? How do I know if my forgetful husband needs evaluation? What bus service in West Sacramento, or what bus service is in West Sacramento? What do I do if I'm timid about riding the bus? And there's an issue with folks when we're trying to, on the mobility issue, we're going to run into this, that some folks are just unfamiliar with getting on a bus. They haven't used a bus before, and they actually need to be shown how to do it, just to get a level of comfort to kind of break that ice. How do I get free legal help? And I need to keep busy. Who needs volunteers? We've heard a lot of this, I think, in our age-friendly meetings, but the group was very appreciative of Councilmember Roscoe and Sandine, and the three of us showing up in force there. I think it really did support the group's efforts, and this was the 5th year they did this. So it was a very good event. Just briefly on Cap to Cap, I know the mayor will probably go into that in detail. I was on the Transportation and Community Resources team. On the Community Resources side, we met with HUD, and the requests there, budget issues were the big issue, and uncertainty and what the federal policies are. And you'll hear that throughout the Cap to Cap discussion, but there was a request that Ben Carson bring one of his listening sessions to the region and try and hear firsthand what the housing needs, the homeless needs, and things of that nature. So we'll see if that happens. And on the transportation side, there's a lot of discussion about infrastructure, which I think the mayor and will discuss, in public-private partnerships, and really what to expect out of the federal government. And the thought was that it's going to be financing rather than funding in general. The money may not be there as grants, but it's going to be some type of relationship with organizations, private sector mostly, and pooling resources for these projects. But there also was a number of good discussions with Transfer America and Eno Transportation, and also the Policy Center on autonomous vehicles, and how, I mean, at least at the think tank level, which these groups are policy levels, there is a lot of discussion on how to roll these out and what the regulations are going to be, and to really try and encourage these in communities. So, you know, and I think West Sacramento and Sacramento are really poised to take on some of this work. But, and, you know, of course, to cap, a lot of that is also the ability to meet or have private time with local leaders and to build the networking and connections you need to have to make things work in the region. So it was a good trip.
All right, I'll just pick up on that, and first to acknowledge Councilmember Sandine, who was the co-chair representing all the elected officials in the entire region, and helping to lead the trip, and in making sure our priorities were represented, as the whole delegation of several hundred, 400 people from throughout the Sacramento region, business and nonprofit and government leaders were out there advocating that our projects and our priorities were front and center, and did a great job. Having also been the regular chair of the trip a few years back as a leader within the Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. The couple meetings I wanted to highlight from cap to cap that I participated in. Well, first, what Mr. Ledesma was referring to, that during cap to cap, the deal was reached on Sunday while we had arrived in D.C. on Saturday. The deal was reached between the congressional leaders on Sunday on the omnibus fiscal year 2017 appropriations and continuing resolution. This was the budget that had been, one of many that had been kicked down, the can had been kicked down the road on all of last year. So it's the fiscal year that we're already in. It started in October of last year, for which there was no budget adopted. The Congress reached an agreement that provided for the passage of an appropriations bill and a continuing resolution. And the appropriations bill included $50 million for our streetcar project, which was a huge victory. The president had been elected and said, well, I'm not funding any more transit projects, and half the Congress said they weren't funding any more transit projects, and lo and behold, there was a significant appropriation in the budget, in the appropriations bill for our project, and just in time in terms of continuing progress towards the full funding agreement with the federal government. So that was announced on Sunday. The votes were taken while we were there in the House and the Senate, and then the president ultimately for his signature. We then met with the Office of Management and Budget on the Monday, the day after the congressional deal had been reached, but before the vote had been taken, because our next concern was, well, that's great to have the appropriation, but we still need the full funding agreement in order to spend the money, spend that $50 million, and also to guarantee that we will have the next $25 to $50 million in the remainder of the project that we're expecting from the federal government. And we're concerned because the fiscal year 2018 budget by the White House had included no money to do full funding and grant agreements, that we weren't going to be able to accomplish that potentially if we did not finish in time, or that if they withdrew the funding earlier. We met with OMB, the head of OMB in charge of the transportation unit, and they were deferential to Congress, that Congress has acted, and it's our job now to make sure that it happens. And they signaled that they were prepared to work on it. They knew our project; it was a good project, and we're prepared to do what was necessary in order to get it accomplished. So that was as important in a lot of ways as the congressional action itself, to have essentially the White House green light the administrative work that would be necessary in order to make that $50 million and the next $25 to $50 million happen as well. I also served on the workforce team in addition to the transportation team, and we met with the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor and also the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Education around a host of issues, but including some of the key elements of our Kids Home Run program here in West Sacramento, and some of the federal changes that would be helpful around some of the Workforce Investment Act dollars that would allow us to use those resources more effectively to match our investments in things like internships for high school students and
other elements related to the Kids Home Run. And then, as a quirk I still can't explain, I was asked to present at the U.S. Senate's Career Technical Education Caucus
because of what we're doing on Career Pathways work here in West Sacramento, and maybe just because of the impressive business of the week. The chair of the caucus, Senator Tim Kaine, who was the nominee for vice president in the November election, said he was going to have to come in and out of the caucus meeting, so he asked me to chair it. So I was, for a brief moment in time, I was the chair of the U.S. Senate caucus on career technical education. Actually, a really useful session around as the Perkins Act, which governs the federal investment in vocational education, is coming up for reauthorization this year. It was a great opportunity to help spread some ideas around reforms to Perkins that would maximize what we're trying to do here locally around internships in college and career pathways, and upskilling our own local workforce to take advantage of all the jobs that we have here in West Sacramento, and they're on the way. So it was a very productive session for all of us, and also for the Deputy City Manager, John Robinson, who was a central part of that trip as well. Then also last week, the Transportation Committee at SACOG met, and we took up an older adult study that SACOG is leading on. We're the first of the major metropolitan transportation organizations in California to be focusing in that area. There's a lot of good stuff in the preliminary study, but I've asked them to send a copy over to the Deputy City Manager and to both of you in order to help align it, because I think it could really benefit from the lessons that we're already learning here in the city through the task force and the related work and the survey work with the AARP, but some good elements there. And the advantage of that is that we'll, to the extent we're able to infiltrate the funding formulas and the criteria and the points rubrics for SACOG funding, for other transportation projects with some of the livable communities and age-friendly notions that we've been promulgating here in West Sacramento will advantage some of our own projects. We're also working on extending the van pool incentive program. We don't have a whole lot of users here in West Sacramento, but we do have some. There are subsidies for van pools of $300 per month for the first 6 months, and that's about to expire. We're looking to both extend that, but also make the subsidies permanent with a special funding source that we have from the federal government. Finally, we took up the proposal for a Sacramento to Davis rail study with the grants, I think, from Caltrans. I'm not sure where the grant is from. So the SACOG has some resources to conduct a study on running essentially a high-frequency rail service between Davis and Sacramento. I'm the only YOLO representative on the Transportation Committee, and I won't say I objected to the study, but I raised some concerns about whether or not this is really a good use of our time and money. We've done several studies about regional rail already. I think Mr. Tuttle, in his various lives, has supervised 6 or 7 of these studies all by himself. And it isn't really that we don't know enough about ridership and demand and all of that. It's that there's just some hard-knuckled negotiations and discussions with the underlying railroads around the conflict between passenger and freight. So we're going to take another look at this study and see whether we could spend the money more effectively rather than studying the same things over again, to look at how we might be able to align with some of the work that we're already doing here in West Sacramento and with our YOLO partners on just direct work with Union Pacific and some of the other railroads about how to make it more feasible and more attractive to them to provide trackage for higher frequency levels on the Capitol Corridor, essentially, to meet that same need. All right. Also in this item, I want to that we've previously voted to establish the Riverfront Joint Powers Authority, which will be the successor to the Streetcar Policy Steering Committee. And so, given that, I'd like to simply appoint the currently members of the Streetcar Policy Committee to the Riverfront JPA, which is myself and Mr. Ledesma. Then those 2 members, along with the 2 members from the City of Sacramento, will select a 5th member, mutually agreeable to the two jurisdictions. So,
Motion?
Yes.
Motion.
Okay. It's been moved by Ms. Roscoe and seconded by Ms. Endine to confirm those appointments. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. We have no other, under 1C, we have no other commission appointments to make this evening. So we'll proceed to the consent agenda, which is items 2 through 10. You have a memo at our desks from the city manager regarding some minor clarification and amendments to item 9. Are there any other items that any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for a separate question or comment? None? All right, we do have one request for public comment, and that's is on item 6. So let's go there next, which, item 6 is an informational report on National Safe Boating Week. And I think from the United States Coast Guard, we are joined by Bob Schabert. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the City Council. National Safe Boating Week is kicking off on May 20th this year. It's kind of an important year this year because our water obviously is high, it's cold, it's fast, and we want to avoid as many drownings as we can out there. We need to bring attention to life jackets. A couple of the television stations this year will be participating on Friday on the Wear Your Life Jacket to Work Day. They will actually be on television. This year, Coast Guard has teamed up with the city of West Sacramento. We're going to hold an event on the Riverwalk. We are going to have several static displays. West Sac PD will be there. The fire department will be there. Yolo County Sheriff's Department will be there, bring our vessels out. Coast Guard is going to set up several displays. We're going to be teaching free paddleboard classes. We have a life jacket giveaway program. One of the events we have is the Ready, Set, Wear It photo opportunity. It's kind of a national thing where we have a competition to see how many people we can actually get in 1 year with their photographs on. And we'd really like to have participation from you folks to come out and get your photograph taken. We even have life jackets for you. That will be at about 11:45 on that day. The event's going to kick off at about 10:30. And at about 11:30, DART, the Drowning Accident Rescue Team, is going to come in. They're going to do a swift water rescue demonstration. After that, I've got a C-27 rescue plane from McClellan flying in. They're going to do a low-level flyby, which will be followed by a helo out of San Francisco. Our Coast Guard helo is going to do a water rescue swimmer demonstration, and then it's going to be followed up by another rescue from DART. So it should be quite a great deal, great day. And
Go all out on this one.
you've got to come out, Mr. Mayor, and participate in it. Seriously, we'd like to see all of you folks from the City Council out there. I know our Chief of Police and the Fire Department will be out there participating also. I think I've got about everything covered. I even have time left. I can't believe this. One of the other things coming up is starting this next year, January 1st, the state of California is going to start requiring boating license. And by the year 2020, everybody has to have a license on a boat. It's going to go in segments. The first year is people 20 years and younger must complete a safe boating class. We're going to be teaming up with the city of West Sacramento Parks and Recreation to be teaching these classes as a part of the city's program. The city of West Sacramento is going to promote it, provide the space, we'll provide the instructors, and it's going to be a real win-win for our community. Anyway, I got to give a special thanks to our city Parks and Rec and our fire department. Without their participation, this event would not be taking place. There's been a lot of hours, a lot of effort put in, and our police department's been fantastic. It's just, I cannot say enough good about our community. And I see I have a minute and one left. I'm going to take a moment to go to a side note. I moved over here in the early 70s. I was a member of the Sheriff's Department at the time. I patrolled these streets up until the very last night before we became a city. And I have to say, since our city council's taken over and our city, I am so proud to be a member of the city of West Sacramento. Our community is superb. Our river walk is great. I cannot thank you folks enough for what you've done for our city. You have truly made us the premier city. Okay.
I think we're all coming to your event now.
Excellent.
That
Excellent.
was a great closer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I think we have a pretty high proportion of boaters on our council as well.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, since we're a water surrounded city during the bypass era. Did you have a question, Ms. Roscoe?
Yeah, I just needed clarification as to the date.
Date.
of
It's going to
the-
be Saturday, May 20th, and we're going to kick it off about 10:30. It goes to about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Cindy Tuttle's also arranged for us to have a couple of food trucks there. So it's going to be a great event.
Is there a band, and is it called Unsupervised that's playing?
I've been trying, and she just quite won't go for that. We are going to have the food out there. Channel 31, Channel 40, and Channel 10 are going to do a lot of good coverage for us. And we should get a lot of great publicity and get a lot of people. I'm hoping for a few thousand people to turn out for this event in our premier city.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have a good night.
All right, with that, we have the consent agenda then before us. Is there a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, and with the modifications to item 9, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. That brings us to our time-sensitive agenda, item 11, which is our public hearing. We have had a request from the city manager to move the item 17. I guess I shouldn't, I feel like I teased Mark Collier now coming up, and now he's going to be mad. But with it's the city manager who's requested that we move item 17 to this point in our agenda. And out of deference that we have several community members who've joined us for that item. So if there's no,
You need a motion for it?
no, but if there's no objection, we'll
No
go to
objection.
item 17, then we'll return directly to item 11 following item 17. So item 17 is a presentation of update on homeless action plan and consideration of resolution 17-38 in support of Sutter Health's Getting to Zero initiative. Mr. Laurel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. We have a PowerPoint to go with this item, but before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge a lot of the people that are here tonight. You mentioned a lot of the members of the community. A lot of members of our staff that have been working on the homeless issue for quite some time. In the police department, obviously Chief McDonald, Deputy Chief Strange, Sergeant Kenny, and specifically the senior lead officers, one that works on homelessness, Officer Engel, and Jason Mahaffey, who works on West Capitol Avenue and Active and Secure program. Of course, Mark Sawyer, our homeless coordinator, he'll be joining me in a second to help with the presentation and Q&A. From the Parks Department, Cindy Tuttle and Sam Cooney will be available for questions if those come up. And I want to acknowledge Tracy Dickinson, the county's homeless coordinator, is in attendance tonight. We also are joined by members of the Mercy Coalition, and I don't know if someone from Sutter Health is here, but I believe they were planning to attend. So with that, that's sort of the team that has come together on this item, and when we get to Q&A, they'll all be available for different topics. So the workshop is going to have 4 different parts right in front of you here, but I think I want to start by saying the overall goal for tonight is to present the council with an understanding of the framework we've created around homelessness, how we approach homelessness in West Sacramento, what we do to impact it, but also pointing out where some of the gaps in that system may be and how we may look to affect those. So that's kind of the theme tonight. It's a multifaceted issue involving a lot of different agencies, a lot of effort going on, especially with the county and services. But what we were hoping to get out tonight is direction on the recommendations we presented to help with advancing that overall framework on how we approach homelessness. And this is a very basic diagram, but I think it kind of illustrates our current system. We have at the city level, we have placed a tremendous effort in terms of enforcement and cleanup of illegal camps, but also protecting open space from occupation and reoccupation of those camps, while also through the homeless coordinators' work and the senior lead officers, creating a referral system so that people that are encountered in the field are having a direct link. It's a services-first approach, and that's where the county and the nonprofit community comes in with those services. And ultimately, the goal here is really twofold. One is to get people placed in housing eventually so that they're not on the streets anymore, or whether they're unsheltered or sheltered homeless. We're trying to affect that outcome. But also, on the ground level, in those open space areas in the public, we're able to reduce the presence of homelessness and further manage it in a way that it doesn't worsen from where we were a few years ago. So I think that kind of describes the overall framework of our program and what we're trying to affect here. I'll use this later to explain where some of the gaps might be in that system. So the Homeless Action Plan, you're all familiar with that. It was a few years ago when we adopted it. It was an 18-month strategy. There were a lot of things that were done out of that plan, and there's a whole list in your report. There's a table in the back that describes that, along with the goals that we set out to do. But I think for this item, it's really important to point out that the Homeless Action Plan was the first step in creating that framework that led to all the efforts that the city and really the coordination, unprecedented coordination between the city, the county, and the nonprofit community around the issue of homelessness. So I want to go through some of those major outcomes and some of the things that we're doing today as a result of that. First, I mentioned the homeless coordinator, senior lead officers. Those are currently funded by grants, CDBG grant funds. It was actually an old state CDBG grant that funds the homeless coordinator position, not our current entitlement funds. There's eligibility issues there, but that grant goes through October. And then we have a federal COPS grant that funds the senior lead officers. And they are really the overall coordinators, managers of this service-first approach for the city. They're the ones in the field doing the camp visitations, connecting with the homeless individuals in the field, and connecting them to services through referrals to the county. They're doing regular encampment visitations in different places throughout the city. They're tracking where those camps are, where the trends are. In fact, they're using a new application that was developed through the STIR program, Startup and Residence Program, called Appledore. And Mark Sawyer, when he gets up here, he's going to talk a little bit about his experience in this overall program, also how he's been using that that application, and sort of the overall effect on the community as he sees it in the field through this services first approach. The county is our lead partner, and I don't want to say just lead on services. The county is the service provider in the city, them and nonprofit agencies. So we really want to stress that. The goal from day one here was to put the county in that position and have them lead on services. The city's job is really about being in the field, doing the enforcement, doing the cleanup, but also making those referrals, making sure people are getting the help they need. So, and the county, I think, as I said before, has been doing a great job in stepping up that coordination. If you compare it to 5-6 years ago, we still have a lot of work to do, we think, but the level of cooperation at this point is much better than it was before the action plan. So Tracy and her work has coordinated the HPAC. You probably heard of the HPAC or attended some of their meetings. They are a group of all the organizations involved in homeless services in the county. One of the things the key outcomes of that group is going to be this homeless management information system that will be a coordinated data entry point. So there's better coordination among the people that are dealing with different clients in the overall system. So also, we have participated through funding the county's efforts every year. For at least the past few years, we've contributed $20,000 to fund a portion of the position at the county, but also the operation of the emergency shelter in Woodland. So a good case study of these overall efforts I wanted to point out that I think you're all aware of, but it's something that's really worth noting in the context of this report. River Point Marketplace, a couple years ago, was really overrun with homeless camps along the railroad tracks between the area you see here, between the railroad tracks and the fence along IKEA and Walmart. So what happened was the reports were coming and PD was tracking this issue. They discovered that there were at least 18 individuals really entrenched over there in camps. They formed a committee that involved everyone that had anything to do with this issue, including starting with the Chamber of Commerce. They got involved and really rallied the business community. Walmart and IKEA stepped up. And then the property owners, RD 537 and Union Pacific, were at the table as well. But going into that, it wasn't just an enforcement operation. They didn't just go in and clean up the camp and move people along. That's actually what used to happen here, if you remember, not that long ago. Instead, they started by doing camp visitations. There were 3 months worth of visitations to connect people to services, get them other options besides being cited for illegal camping or whatever the outcomes may be. And as a result of that, on cleanup day, all of the occupants moved along. There were no arrests. And a lot of the people that were involved in that obtained services through the county and had better outcomes as a result. And then sort of anecdotally, but the crime statistics in that area had been different. They had been more crimes that you'd expect from when you have retail issues, things like shoplifting and whatnot, aggressive panhandling. So the crime stats for that area did have a marked increase or decrease when the enforcement action was taking place, and the stats again have tended to come down in that area. And we like to say it was because of that. We don't, we can't make that correlation direct, but it's safe to say that had an effect on River Point Marketplace. So open space maintenance, as I mentioned, is another key component of this overall program. That's led by the Parks Department. They coordinate with the police department using Mark's work on using Appledore to track the camps. And as enforcement actions happen, Parks is there to do the cleanup and do the vegetation management, but also proactively they're going out and doing vegetation management in areas that could be vulnerable to homeless encampments. So they've managed over 80 acres since they started. The stats are there, 48 cleanups, and what's notable is 315 cubic yards of debris. It's a significant effort to sustain that. I just want to point out, thus far, that's been supported by the general fund, and it could be more robust, but I think what Parks would tell you right now, even to maintain the current level, has been extremely challenging, both from a funding standpoint, but operationally, just having the people, the manpower that is required to sustain that kind of effort. So they have employed some creative measures listed here, including assistance from outside agencies. The community favorite is probably the goats, but the goats have been used in areas that are harder to access, more vulnerable terrain. Along the Barge Canal is the picture you see here, but also in areas like Stone Lock and other parts of town where it's less efficient to go in and try to use a weed whacker on everything. So the goats have been innovative but valuable tool to open space maintenance. The Mercy Coalition has been a key agency in the city dealing with homelessness. They're a group of faith-based organizations. I was fortunately corrected tonight that the Mercy Coalition didn't actually come out of the Homeless Action Plan effort. It did involve many people who are already involved in it, but it's been around for at least 5 or 6 years, and the member organizations have been around longer than the city. So, but the Mercy Coalition does the meal distribution at the County Social Services Building. They were actually working through the city. Originally, it was over at the Broader Boat Ramp and in other parts of town. It made sense to move it over to the County Services Building, so you have clients that are already there that could access other services, so that's what's happening now. The Mercy Coalition does a lot of other work around homelessness, but that's really the one that I would point to this program and say that there was good coordination between the city and the nonprofit. And then in terms of other actions, we did the update to the motel inspection ordinance. I'm going to pause on that one, come back to it. And we also adopted an emergency shelter ordinance that was compliant with state law. And then the item that really was connected to the Homeless Action Plan, the outcomes from it, was bridge to housing. It followed on the heels of the plan. You've all seen the presentations, heard the stats on bridge to housing, but I think what's important to note here is 2 years later, what the results are still on the ground, and that's 32 people remain permanently housed. So nearly half the participants that originally entered the program are still permanently housed through the Bridge to Housing program. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark Sawyer. He's going to talk about his experience in the field, but also go through the 2007 homeless census, and he'll turn it back over to me in a minute. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, Council, nice to see you guys today. I just wanted to, I'm going to go over the homeless pit count, the point in time count that took place on January 24th of this year. But first, I just want to go over my overall efforts as the homeless coordinator. I think I've met each of you individually, but never once at a platform like this. So I just want to go on, talk about what I've been doing and how things are going from my point of view. I started in July 1 of 2016. And I decided that the best thing for me to do was try to build rapport with the people that I was going to be serving, and that is largely with micro-level social worker, meeting the people. And I thought that would be good if I did a lot of camp outreaches to the encampment occupants. And so I worked with Officer Engel and Officer Mahaffey, and I just went out to camps and met people. And just, I'd like to say today that I know almost every person that is homeless in this city, at least the ones that make themselves available or that we're able to find. By doing that and getting out in the camps and building rapport, it dawned on me that perhaps we should have some type of multi-agency operations where multiple people go out into the encampment so also they can build rapport, because I was being used as a linkage piece to meet people, gain their trust to some degree, find out what their deficits are, and send them on to the right place. And I thought, well, perhaps I can bring those places I'm sending people out into the encampments and try to build the rapport there. So I started working with Tracy Dickinson in the county, and we started doing these multi-agency encampment operations. I think that they've been successful. We actually had one today, and it was actually difficult to find some encampments today. We were able to find some, but there was less than we usually have. And we've used Fourth and Hope Homeless Shelter to come out with us on the encampments, some of their outreach workers, and we've used other workers from Yolo County Health and Human Services, and those have been great. Another thing that I've started to implement since taking over that I feel has been very successful is the walk-in appointments. When I first started, I was meeting people and saying, hey, come see me on Tuesday, come see me on Wednesday, and it wasn't working. And so I decided to funnel them all on Thursdays from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. I didn't think I would get very many people to come in. I thought, well, many homeless people won't want to come down to the homeless shelter to see me. I mean, come down to the police department to see me, but they did. I've had 104 appointments since August 15th when I started, and I've gotten 2/3 of them have been Yolo County residents. The other third have been, taken back to Sacramento or referred back to Sacramento, and 64 have been housed since July 1st. So I think that's a good number, and I'm proud of that. So now I'm going to go over the homeless count. At a HPAC meeting, I was asked by Tracy Dickinson and others who would like to lead be the lead in West Sacramento. I agreed. And so I kind of tried to formulate a plan with others that are working with me on how we could make sure we got the most accurate number. And I decided to ask the police department to help me with that for a number of reasons. One, to just provide some oversight and security for the people that were going to be volunteering in this event, and also because I felt like the officers could get us access to places that maybe other accounts in the past had overlooked. So we went out, we broke up into 3 groups, one focusing on camps in Southport, one focusing on camps in the Broderick Boat Ramp in the north part of the city, and then another on West Capitol corridors and also where they feed at the 500 Jefferson. We got 87 people that identified as unsheltered last night. It was it was a little high than I thought, and I have always been of the opinion that there was about 75 people at any time in West Sacramento that were homeless sleeping outside with a tent, but it was a little bit higher. We also got 87 sheltered. Now that sheltered number is motel occupants, and I believe also people in the Shores to Hope transitional program, and it's everyone that the county is paying for their motel. It's not just every person in the motel, obviously. And so the number was 174. 74% have lived in the county for 7+ years. 34% grew up in West Sacramento. Oh, yeah. So I was obviously only involved in this count, so I can't really speak to the previous counts too much, other than I believe that you could attribute the drop from 2013 of unsheltered to 2015 most likely to the Bridge to Housing operation. The number from 2015 to 2017 has raised a little. Not sure how they did the 2015 count, although I do know that they did not use the police department to get to some of the harder reached areas. So possibly we did more of an extensive outreach this year and got more people. That's all I got tonight. Thank you for hearing me. Sorry. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mark. So not directly related to the PIC count, but related to this topic, the city recently conducted a motel survey of residents in the motels. The numbers that were collected, we think, represent about 1/3 of motel residents. And I think in terms of the issue of homelessness, there are some takeaways here that we want to highlight. So as Mark mentioned, when the PIT census is done, it only considers people sheltered if their motel rent is being paid by a service agency. If they're using their own money, they're not considered sheltered homeless. Yet they are definitely marginally housed, as we know from our experience over the years with motels. So motels are the primary source for people in that situation. And this is really one of the reasons why the city moved to adopt the pass not pass changes to the motel inspection program. A lot of the residents that are in the motels are being put there by payees. That's defined as a service that is assigned to help someone who can't manage their own funds. And so the payees are using the motels as the main housing source, regardless of where people are coming from. And the pass not pass system is really meant to be a signal to the payee services to put people in motels that are deemed safe and sanitary. So there were about 105 participants in the survey. As you can see here, one of the obvious takeaways is that 43% were Sacramento County residents. That wasn't surprising. We knew that there were pay services putting people in here from other parts of the region. But what was also interesting is 37% were from other counties or other states. So when you isolate just the West Sacramento number and the Yolo County number, we're only talking about 20% of the residents there. What's also notable is 3/4 of them were receiving SSI. 23% of those had a payee. So A couple of things you can extrapolate from that. So 80% of motel residents surveyed here were from outside of West Sacramento. And if you take a straight line on that SSI number, you could draw the conclusion that up to 60% of the motel residents that are from other places are receiving SSI through another county. So I think that's a significant statistic, something that really tells us a lot about our situation with the motels and really informs our strategy going forward. So back to this chart, I think what I want to do here is show where some of the things I talked about fit in within this overall system. Again, enforcement and cleanup is the city's primary role, along with open space protection. We rely on the county for services and also the nonprofit community. And services do a lot to get people ready for housing, get them stable, get a SSI, income assistance, CalFresh is another name for food stamps, and then employment readiness. So all those are key factors here, but ultimately we need people to transition onto housing, and the county also does a good job of helping with that effort. So does Mark, but we are limited in terms of what we can do there because, as I'll talk about in a minute, most of the housing stock that we have is really meant for traditional affordable housing, people who have stable credit, and employment. On open space protection, that's the other key factor along with services and housing to break that cycle of where we have to do continued enforcement and cleanup. So to the extent we can continue to protect the areas from reoccupation and do a good job of maintaining open space in vulnerable areas, that reduces the occurrence of camps. And as we're doing services and housing options, we're reducing the overall number of homeless people on the ground. So I think that overall system shows the city's role, the county's role, and where some of the gaps might be if our end goal is to reduce the number or affect the outcomes. So I mentioned some of the challenges with open space. What we're finding now is all the effort that went in really addressed what we describe as kind of the low-hanging fruit. We've been trimming and doing vegetation management on some of the areas that are more visible, but what is being found in the field, as Mark just said, it was more difficult to find camps. Well, that's because a lot of them are going into more remote locations that are harder to reach even by foot, let alone with heavy equipment. So that's one of the challenges of doing open space management as we go forward. And then on housing, I already mentioned that all of our affordable housing stock, all 1,700 units plus, are considered more workforce housing. They're the 35 to 60% of area median income type of units. It's not to say that there aren't resources out there. Housing navigation, as we found, is a key factor in getting people into permanent housing situations. That's where someone is assigned to help someone who's homeless navigate through the system of basic things like getting an ID, all the way to getting financial assistance and then getting them into permanent housing. So that's something we really feel is an area that could be improved, but also given that our motels are sort of the de facto housing stock for the people that are most vulnerable in our community, there's potentially a gap there in terms of the overall housing system that we have in town. So next, I wanted to focus on new funding resources that are available, and this is on homelessness at large. A lot of these are focused more on housing, but other ones like Measure E are more for different issues related to homelessness. So on Measure E, you know about Measure E. The only thing I want to point out here is that the council targeted about $750,000 for the homeless issue. So everything from community impacts to services. You also know we recently became entitlement for CDBG, as long as that program's still around. At least it made it this year through the budget. So we get about a $400,000 entitlement allocation every year. That can be used for a limited area of affecting housing. I point out here property acquisition for either permanent housing or supportive housing can be used. You can also use it for services, but we're limited to 15% of the overall funding. And believe me, that comes with a high degree of administration work by using that money for public services. So what we've tried to do is make it more efficient where we're targeting it for kind of bigger ticket items. The one that is front and center tonight, getting zero, is Sutter Health's new program, new initiative focused on housing first. It's a regional initiative in Sacramento, Placer, and Yolo County. They put up at least $10 million. They're trying to raise up to $20 million regionally to affect homelessness through a housing first approach. The resolution before you tonight simply voices the city's support for the program, and Again, I think someone is here from Sutter Health if you want to hear more, but I wasn't able to connect with them before. The No Place Like Home program is coming through the state of California. It's over $1 billion in total funding that's available. It's going to be spread out over multiple years. We think the first NOFA will be out in the beginning of next year. We'll have about $200 million available, but that's strictly for permanent supportive housing. And then similarly, the National Housing Trust Fund is a federal program that came through the state. It's about $10 million annually. Again, that's for housing at the lowest of incomes, including supportive housing. So I wanted to go through these funding sources briefly and just go over some recommendations related to each one. On Measure E, this is going to reside with the budget discussion later this month and in June. But we at least want to give some feedback from staff's perspective on where some areas of Measure E funding might make sense in terms of the homeless set aside. So as I mentioned, we are having a challenge of continuing the effort, not just expanding the effort, but also sustaining the current effort on cleanup using general fund dollars and other limited resources. We think that's a good place for Measure E money in terms of keeping the cleanup and open space maintenance effort going. Also, as I mentioned, the homeless coordinator, senior lead officers are funded by grants currently. Those have a limited time frame on them, and both of those positions, from staff's perspective, would make sense in terms of continuing that service-first approach. And then also, there's other options out there for services funding. I listed a couple here, but a couple of these you've heard about, like Downtown Streets is a program that combines work readiness with housing and service navigation. That could be an interesting thing if you want to learn more about it. And then a couple other things, and supportive housing is on this list as well, mainly because that is the area that has the most opportunity to leverage other funding sources, like the ones I just mentioned. And then CDBG, what we're recommending for this year, we'll be back probably in July with the annual action plan to keep ourselves, give ourselves the most flexibility for what we do going forward this year. We'll be recommending that we allocate the funding for acquisition and support of affordable housing. That gives us sort of a range of options to work with in terms of how we use those dollars. I mentioned Resolution 17-38 that is before you tonight, and for now, we think we should just work with our partners, including the county, the West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation, Mercy Housing, who has some expertise in the Housing First model, to further develop a potential proposal for how we might access Sutter Health money. And then the other two are, the other two funding sources, No Place Like Home and National Trust Fund. At this point, it's just a matter of monitoring the NOFAs and seeing that we have a project that could be ready once that funding comes out. But as I mentioned, it won't be ready until at least the beginning of next year. The Mercy Coalition, we want to continue to support their distribution of meals and all their other activities in town, so that's a pretty straightforward recommendation. And then finally, working with the county, as I mentioned, there appear to be some gaps in terms of how services could be more tailored to our situation in West Sacramento. I mentioned housing navigation is one, but there are probably others. So the point here is really to work with the county to both refine how funding is used for our West Sacramento clientele, but also look at how they're spending money in the motels to house people and how we might better utilize those limited funds to affect better outcomes for their clients in more stable, safe, and sanitary housing situations. So that concludes the presentation. I know that was a lot of information, but we wanted to be comprehensive about it and have a frank discussion about where we stand today with homelessness. And I'm available, plus the team I mentioned, to take questions. Thank you.
All right, and Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson has been very active in this process and the development of the homeless action plan in the first place, and so I wanted to first turn to you, see if you had any overview comments that you'd like to make or any questions you'd like to lead off.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so it's really great work, and thank you for bringing us up to date on what's been going on. We've had a lot of activity since the action plan was approved back in 2013, and we've seen a lot of success. So, I mean, at this point, I think the homeless management information system, I think, is huge, because one of the things in the past that we weren't really able to do was, find out who these individuals are and then actually look at it from a case management perspective. It was in the past, you had folks that appeared in two different systems, and you had being treated differently by two different systems. Now that really kind of brings it together with the HPAC and their assistance to really help bring this together. So you can have a concerted effort of all the services coordination of a specific individual. And I think Mr. Sawyer's outreach, I think, is great to get to know the folks personally and build the trust. It looks like you're doing a great job there. And that really shows, I think, particularly, your open office hours and just building the trust of a lot of people. Because, one of the problems is we're basically going on a two-pronged approach. One is enforcement, and there's necessarily going to be some friction when you do enforcement, but it's also the opposite end of the helping hand and to, particularly to get folks into the services and particularly get a stream of income coming in, which is what we were able to do with Bridge to Housing. So now you've got an income stream coming in that you can actually afford to get into housing. So, and in terms of the gaps, I know you've had discussions with Yellow Housing and the West Sac Housing Development Corporation. So I think there's opportunities here to really kind of look at these recommendations and look at those organizations on how we can deal with the supportive housing use of vouchers and be creative on creating these actual housing units in West Sacramento. I know Yellow Housing has vouchers and they want to be involved. And, that would be a natural partnership with them. And the same thing with West Sac Housing Development Corporation. So I think it's great. In terms of, articulating these gaps. So right now we basically have your staff report and run off of that. Is that kind of the idea? Because, my focus is going to be on these gaps and how we fill them and what resources we have to do that. And of course, we'll have a discussion on use of Measure E funds. And I think the thought there was use as a seed money, not really to fund these things 100%, but to use it as ways to augment. But really kind of give us focus on, what we need to advocate for, what relationships need to be built, because I think there's some political work that we need to do to kind of move this thing forward.
Right, if I could comment on that last point, that really was the intent of the report tonight. The next item with the council would be the budget dealing with Measure E. So we really wanted to inform your discussion about the use of those funds at this stage. I think everything else that I talked about kind of goes from there, but given that that's coming up on the agenda soon, we thought this was a good point in time to kind of frame the issue for you.
Okay. Well, thank you.
It was a really solid report. We've been at this for quite a while, and we will be for quite a while. And I think it is important. I mean, when we approach really any other issue in the city, whether it's crime or getting people into healthier and more sustainable transportation options, we don't set this. We don't approach them with how will we eliminate all crime by next year. Right, we don't delude ourselves into thinking that the right set of policies and connections and collaboratives and initiatives will do that. When we did the Kids Home Run, we didn't say that what we're going to do is by 2025 every single young person is going to get a $80,000 a year job. We're looking for opportunity. We're cognizant. I think Mark Friedman said this best. We're cognizant of the limits of power. Here at the city, we're a small government. We have a limited set of tools. Traditionally, this hasn't been a topic that cities have, up until this generation, have really tackled in a serious way. And we don't have a lot of great models. And so there are real limits on what our capacity is when we approach it at the system level. And then we fail. We have failed consistently at the system level. But we said we were going to end homelessness in 10 years. It's year 12. And you walk away from that thinking, how awful we are. Gosh, how sad. We don't do that with anything else. When we open up, the bike share system or the streetcar, we don't think, oh my God, we didn't hit 100% of people riding on things other than single occupancy vehicles. Woe is us. But that's partly because we don't set a goal that extends beyond what our ability to deliver really is. And so I say this because we often are trying to think about how do we engineer the entire system where there's no crack to fall between and everyone gets caught and whatever. And given that this involves lots and lots of different agencies, lots and lots of individual decisions and policies and funding gaps, being clear about what it is that we're actually intending to achieve and what our measurement of success really matters. So the outcome measures of all of this, I think, continue to be important. And the appendix or the attachment to is a good articulation of sort of how we're doing on the implementation of the pieces of the strategy, of the action plan, but they're not about the outcomes, right? The outcomes are like how many people are homeless, how many are unsheltered, how many of those are kids, and those are the ones that we're used to collecting, but they are not just that. And I think in the Measure E campaign, I tried to emphasize, and Mr. Ledesma, who led the campaign, also emphasized, it is also about how many miles of the Riverwalk can a father and his daughter bike along without being harassed or attacked? How many days of the year can the single woman living in Metro Place not have somebody sleeping on her porch and feeling like she can't leave her home? That the outcomes also matter. And I know it makes those of us in the social services world uncomfortable to talk about that because we don't want to. What we want to say is if we just connect people to mental health counseling, all of that will go away, and maybe. But we owe it. I mean, our job our principal role is in the safety domain, and our citizens are depending on us to do that. And if we want our citizens to continue to support investing in things like Measure E, which they did overwhelmingly, they need to know that we are just as committed to making sure that the impacts side of the equation is being measured and being addressed in a serious way, and not just as a sort of a magical outcome as if we do housing and mental health counseling, that all those other things won't happen anymore, because there are plenty of communities around the country that are doing both of those things better than we are in terms of rapid rehousing and services and other things, and still are having the same community impacts. We have to address those. Those need to be in our outcome indicators so we can see how we're doing and give a reasonable report to the community, that members of the community who say, well, council member, you say homelessness, our homeless count's showing it's gone down other than this year, it's gone down every single year of the count since 2012 or 13. By a lot, actually. I mean, we've had significant reductions, 20% reductions in the homeless count every single year until this year, where it went up, but Mr. Sawyer said it may be because we did a better job of counting. And it didn't go up by much. But when you ask folks in the community, so what's your lived experience with homelessness, it's almost the exact opposite. Right? Folks saying it's getting worse every single year. And that's not just a cognitive dissonance. There is a sense of the impacts in people's daily lives being more severe than they have been in the past. And if we ignore that, it's to our peril in terms of building the kind of community support that we're going to need to make the investments and build the trust and the patience around the community in order to solve those challenges. It's especially important now because whether it's the threat to CDBG or other things, we don't have unlimited. We may have less money than we had before. And so things like Measure E really matter, and Measure E would never have passed in terms of the resources for homelessness would never have passed in a Measure E 10 years ago or 15 years or 20 years ago, never. And they passed this time because we said to voters, I think in the document you said that the Measure E was to address homelessness and its impacts. What we told the voters was, you vote for Measure E, we will reduce homelessness. From the moment you're voting on this, on November, whatever that was, 5th or 6th, we will, from that moment that you are in the ballot box casting your vote, we will reduce homelessness and we will reduce its impacts in the community. And so we have to deliver on that. And so simply doing activities without being able to show that we are accomplishing what we promised and what we said the investments were to achieve is going to be really important if we want the voters to continue to support those efforts. Part of that, I think, in addition to getting it right, getting the outcome measures right so we can communicate, tell the story, direct our programs properly, is also where it's our money, we need to be focusing on the issues where there is consensus in our community. That and the data that you gave us on the motels, I think, was really instructive in that way. If 17% of the folks who are receiving support to live in the motels as a sheltered version of homelessness, only 17% of them are from here, then why should a taxpayer in West Sacramento be investing resources in order to build a transitional housing program from the motel to somewhere else, for example? They shouldn't. I mean, we have limited resources and other priorities as well in our city. So we need to be careful not to adopt when the state and federal governments were the only game in town, and all of their rules say never, ever, ever can you give preference or say that your resources are only for your own residents. Well, if it's mainly our money, then we can actually do that, and we must be doing that. And we have not done that in the past because we haven't put real resources in, and now we have the opportunity to do that. And it will raise some tough questions. You're used to going out and trying to leveraging as much dollars as possible. But I'm not convinced that if we had $1 million over time from Measure E for the housing portion of Measure E, that it wouldn't make sense to spend that $1 million, just the $1 million, to do transitional or other forms of housing that was limited exclusively to homeless individuals who have ties to West Sacramento. Even if that meant we couldn't leverage another $3 million from some state or federal program, which would then would bar us from giving even preference to West Sacramentans in that program. I'd rather have less money to serve more of our neighbors and family members who have become homeless in our community than have more money in order to serve the homeless folks who are coming here from Placer or Sacramento or elsewhere. I mean, that's the in terms of as a local resident and taxpayer, that's a harder choice that we're going to have to start making. But we should decide that ourselves and not just continue the state and federal rules when it's mostly our money that's going to be in play. So I particularly on the transitional housing piece, and Sutter is much more flexible in terms of their commitments on getting to zero than HUD is or the state HCD, and it may be an opportunity for Sutter to help us demonstrate that when you do it in a way that works on the impact side, when you do it in a way that works on meeting the needs of your own residents, your own family members, your own community members, that you can therefore engender a higher level of support by the community in order to make the kind of investments that a lot of communities have refused to do. That's a big win around the Getting to Zero campaign on the regional basis. So all of that requires us having the right, not the right ones, but at least a broader set of metrics that are really outcomes based, in addition to the counts. That speak to the impact side as well. Having said that, we have done a great job. I don't know why. I don't know how. I mean, I can't explain the numbers. I've had to try to, but meeting with mayors from other cities, particularly on the West Coast, where this trajectory which Mark's chart was showing is a downward trajectory on homeless counts. In most of the major West Coast cities, that trajectory during the same period has gone up by 20, 25, 30%. And so, although when people ask me, I tell them it's bridge to housing. We don't really know that, and that doesn't explain the years before bridge to housing either. But we are doing something right, and we need to be celebrating our successes, as I think we did in bridge to housing, and it gave people a sense that maybe we really could make a difference in a way that we hadn't in the past. So, in terms of the specific, I don't really have much to say, but I think in general framing, really thinking about those issues. Last thing on Measure E, because I would like to avoid a bloodbath when the budget comes back. I absolutely don't support in any way the use of Measure E funds to supplant existing expenditures. And in the same way was with measures J and K and U and V, Measure G, that we the purpose of Measure E was to reduce from that moment where we were on homelessness and its impacts. And so I will fight to the death during the budget process to assure that we do not use the voter-approved Measure E funds to essentially buy out existing portions of our current spending. And so I'm hoping we will avoid that altogether by getting enough feedback tonight, but I don't know what my colleagues are going to have to say about the matter. But I'm very strongly opposed to the use of Measure E funds for the purpose of funding existing activities that we would like to transfer out of the general fund, out of the regular general fund.
If you don't mind, I'm not going to comment on that, but on the point before, I just wanted to echo your feedback on the challenges with other funding sources, including tax credits and HUD sources and all that. But we are making some headway, we believe, in terms of the operations side. That's why we're talking to the county about getting a better understanding of how they deploy their funding, where their people that are West Sacramento based are being housed, how the money flows through that system, so we can better understand if there could be an opportunity in terms of the way we manage a project to achieve what you're getting at without running into those barriers with the tax credit rules. I don't have an answer for that yet, but I can tell you that that's a high priority of anything we do housing related, is to make sure that it's West Sac focused and being able to leverage the funding in a way that stays true to that, but still hoping to use some of the more traditional sources of funding. So it's all about the operations and we're learning more as we explore this further, so.
It's so much easier to say to a local resident who is concerned about a shelter or transitional housing or about our overall program on homelessness, who is concerned, and actually rightly, given the experience of most jurisdictions around the country, they're concerned about the whole magnet issue. And I realize it can be overblown. It's also not untrue. So it's much easier to build the kind of community support and enthusiasm around the efforts that we're trying to undertake, to the extent we're able to say, look, I hear you, but what we're doing here is targeted, prioritized, or limited to those folks who, before they were homeless, lived in West Sacramento, or they're the mother who's coming home to her kids who have become homeless, or whatever, that there's some community tie. Virtually no, I've not met anybody in the community that doesn't think we should be doing everything we can to help in that regard. And the extent to which we're able to make that commitment in a real way, then I think it helps us to build the kind of support that we need for both the investments and the sustained, siting of facilities and everything else that's going to be necessary if we're going to really make a dent here. So, Mr. Roscoe and then Ms. Sandine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't around at the time the Homeless Action Plan was implemented or created. However, in my limited time on the council, I've done as much as I can to get myself up to speed, and that includes participating in several ride-alongs with our police department, as well as a coordinated effort with Mark Sawyer and our senior lead officers, Officer Mahaffey and Engel, as well as our Department of Social Services, the County Social Services Office. And I got to say, talk about a group of highly competent people. I know Mr. Sawyer received some compliments tonight, but talk about rapport building with our entire community. Our senior lead officers also have built that, and I saw it firsthand going to several encampments with them. So I really appreciate that approach, the collaborative effort. I think it's, from what I saw during the time that I was with them, it seemed that folks were really amenable to receiving that type of information, because there's just, there's constant obstacles, but if there's someone there to address that obstacle at the time, you wouldn't have to say, well, take this referral and go to Woodland, and you could talk to someone over there, because that probably would not come to fruition. So thank you, first off, for this presentation on behalf of our department and our homeless coordinator, and also Mr. Shabazz, who I've seen in action actually downtown. I dropped my child off at school, and I see him speaking with folks and highly competent, skilled folks out there trying to tackle this very complex issue. So thank you. We've discussed a lot on this topic, but I spent a good portion of my day today. I woke up this morning at 4:30 in the morning so I could take a 3-hour drive to San Jose. And you know where I'm coming right now, because I brought this up. I'm a very vocal advocate of a program that I had a chance to see in person today. And it's called that Downtown Streets Team. You referenced it in your presentation. This, I think, we talk about enforcement, cleanup, services, housing, open space, protection, and under services, it says, employment readiness. Well, today I had an opportunity to see 82 homeless and or previously homeless people who volunteer their time and invest hours of their day from Tuesday through Saturday to work on the streets of San Jose. They do cleanup, they do grounds work, they have different teams that go out and they're dispatched to address issues in the community. May that be graffiti removal or trash pickup or perhaps open space maintenance. And they do this, it's not employment, but they do it in exchange for gift cards. And I'm not trying to educate you, Mr. Laura, because I know you're fully aware of this program. But what was most notable about this model is that the folks, the room was filled with people who had a renewed sense of hope, inclusivity. Folks were talking to me, talking about how their peers now treat them with respect because they wear a shirt and they're part of this community, contributing to a community that they now belong to. And it was a different sense of community, I'd say. And I really think that it's a win-win in lots of ways, because not only does our community benefit from the work that's contributed by these folks that are now motivated to change their situation, but also by these folks who now, I wrote down some things that I saw today. It was a lot of hope and dignity, and people who said that their self-esteem and self-worth had changed. And they also are met with employment coordinators and housing coordinators and other folks that help them navigate the path to self-sufficiency and successful pathways. And so today, many testimonials by folks who said, I just got hired by Safeway, and I'm so proud. And everybody claps for them. And then there's an employee of the week, a volunteer of the week. And again, these are people who've been sitting on a waiting list for weeks just to have the chance to go out there and serve their community they get 20, they've put in 20 hours for a week, and they get a $100 gift card to Walmart, Safeway, grocery outlet, places we have right here in our own community. So I really like to continue that discussion. I'll look forward to it, because this isn't an existing program. This is something that Mr. Mayor mentioned. There's a new idea, and I think it fits perfectly in this model that we've created, the comprehensive approach to homelessness, because, and for me, this is very important. Being a part of this community is an investment. And when you're invested in something, there's no end to what you will do to improve it. And, since my election to this council, I've done everything I can to be a part of this community and put myself in places where I can make decisions that are informed and accept new ideas. And this is one of those things that was worth traveling 3 hours in the dark and returning just in time to get to this council meeting. So I really want to encourage us to think outside the box. And I know you have been receptive, and I do look forward to continuing that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sandine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This update was incredibly helpful to me of the plan. I had seen pieces of this, and when I think I came on council right after the Bridge to Housing program was underway. And just to see it all in one place and to hear kind of elements of what could be coming next for us and what we need to be talking about is incredibly helpful. I want to particularly thank our city staff, the faith-based organizations and nonprofits, and of course the county for. I think this is a whole systems kind of approach to this issue, and I think it's captured well in this plan. You're going to say something, sorry? Look like.
No.
Okay. I think we've made a lot of progress, even in this kind of limited resources and this limited duration. As the mayor said, I do think we have a responsibility to our own, but the Sacramento data related to the hotel occupancy really did kind of stick out to me in terms of that we also don't just, even though we have responsibility to our own, we live in a bigger system. And so I think not to make this even more complex than it already is, because it's a very complex situation with many players. I think looking across the river, I think about like SACOG, and I think about trying to deal with big complex issues. I don't think we need to build a new bureaucracy, but we need to know what's happening and perhaps partner with things that are happening across the river. I'm really heartened by the Sutter Health kind of the approach that they want to put some resources forward, because I too have had an opportunity, like Councilmember Orozco, to see a program. I was on a study mission to Seattle a number of years ago, and one of the main kind of pieces of that study mission that the Metro Chamber puts together was to look at a program that's much like the St. John program for real change here, but it was meant, instead of focused on women and domestic abuse environments, it was focused on homeless individuals in Seattle and getting them trained, getting them inspired, getting them housing, getting them back on their feet. Again, that's I think partnering with folks like Sutter Health, or thinking about other nonprofits perhaps that will come and work side by side with us, kind of with these bigger notions or other things that we can do besides what's already in our toolbox. I think that is something we should keep on the horizon.
Just two quick comments on that. So one, back to regional approaches. The downtown streets thing, I think, is a good example of something that could be done across the river. It's something that probably works better when multiple agencies are funding it, because it does have some startup costs. So that, I don't want to use that specifically, but we are looking at opportunities to partner within the core, at least, the downtown core, And then second, in terms of the county, I was remiss to not mention the leadership of Supervisor Villegas in this overall effort.
We're going to call him up in a minute. It's
Yeah,
just-
thanks. I just want to make sure I said that. I meant to say it
Yeah,
earlier.
okay.
Thanks.
He was giving you a bad look back there.
You can see him back there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to the staff and team that's been working on this, tremendous thank you for all the work you're doing and have done over the past few years in building up this program. Terrific presentation tonight, giving us this overview. I do want to get some specific issues, but one of the points that I'm walking away with, because this has always been a bit of a vexing issue for me, because the kind of the strategy and implementation plan that we've tried to get to, even though we had the homeless strategy and we had real good dialogue about what could be done, I think now it's really starting to crystallize into actionable things. I'm looking at the homeless action plan outcomes and the real tangible things that are being done and we're doing to further to further our efforts to reduce homelessness and its impacts are huge. You just don't, I haven't seen it coalesced like that, so that we can see 3 pages of action items that where we continue to implement, and that is in and of itself is being able to articulate back to a community that we just went to the voters and asked them to continue funding, to find funding to continue making progress in this. This is a very big thing for us to be able to say, look, these are things we're doing, these are the outcomes we've had. So I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, on kind of how we continue to strive for that, because that will be the measure going forward. I do want to address a couple of things regarding simply, first of all, I'll take on the really revealing notion of who is occupying motels. I think we all kind of knew that. We all sort of understood it, but we never quite could validate it with a quantitative number, and you did tonight. But similarly, as Ms. Sandine just said, the opportunity we have by partnering with folks like Sutter, who's doesn't have a geographic border, right? Their border is the folks who walk in their door, to the emergency room or otherwise, that they have to service, and they care for in other ways. And they are kind of could be a unifying point to make sure we look at and understand and partner with. They've already done that. I've attended with Supervisor Villegas, one of Sutter's forums where they gather regional leaders to start talking about this initiative. So again, the forum is there. I think we just need to reach across the river or be there at Sutter and utilize them in addition to their dollars that they want to put forward to it, is find maybe a larger role that they can play to keep that conversation going, look for action items, because that's part of the challenge we have with homelessness. I know that's something that our police chief has talked about before, is how we can do all the work we can, and if something isn't happening on the other side, or they do something on the other side of the river, it ends up here anyway. So I think those are very important points that we need to keep on connecting for, and I think Sutter, in addition to their efforts through their monetary commitment, it could be a vehicle for us to sort of keep working with our peers across the river and throughout the region. The other point I want to talk about is, because this is where I go, and I'll reiterate the things that Mayor Baldwin said around funding and how we approach it, especially with Measure E. I'm very conscious that the services we provide and the point where we're at today, the baseline of services that we've articulated, do cost us. And we've made that commitment and budgetary commitment and decisions that this is what we want to fund. But I am careful and watchful that as we move forward onto new services, be it ones as Councilmember Orozco has brought up, or others that we may want to implement, that further the efforts and our goals to reduce the impacts of homelessness and homelessness overall. I think that is an important part of how we view E, is that it should be accretive. It should be something that further improves what we do, and not just, as the mayor says, supplants what we're currently doing. And we have choices to make, and we have made them around how we fund these basic tasks. But I think this is when we challenge our staff to think a little bit beyond kind of what we currently do, and how can we add on to that, to augment that. So I think it's just one of those things that I too want to make sure we're well understood about when you come back on Measure E expenditure plans and overall plans, that we understand the intent of that because we did make that commitment with the voters. It's an important part of the trust we built with the community. They want to see us reduce impacts too, and that's why they voted for it, in addition to the kids' home run and everything else we did. And we offered to them the value proposition that we would help reduce the impacts and not just kind of supplant things we're already doing. So I agree with you 100%. Finally, what I would offer, and I know Supervisor Villegas is just itching to get up here, but I do want to thank the county and Supervisor Villegas as well, because one of the items that's on our priority list in this year's strategies, in addition to the homeless and our reducing impacts, we put on our list this year priorities around mental health and around mental health services, and what is our role in that. And I know through Supervisor Villegas's leadership and the work of the county is bringing in the mental health crisis teams and understand how that works, so that we can better address. We all know, and I have not gone along right along, but I've heard the stories from our police and through our teams about what we have to deal with on a daily level, which is no fault of any of these individuals that are out there, and it's just the circumstances these folks find. And we found a way to sort of address those folks and bring the services to our streets and not just put them in a jail and let them deal with it. So it's been through tremendous leadership that we've been able to sort of bring the county has come to us and say, how can we help? So thank you very much for that. And I would urge that as we go through the iterations of our next steps, that we continue to focus on those types of things that bring those services to the people that are here, and we can get them to the supportive housing or to other services they need, because that's kind of I think that's been the real leverage point for our successes, is that we've had them physically in West Sacramento, understanding our population and making it happen. So I would just ask that we continue doing that, and I would urge, and this is, I think, a little bit of our cue for our friends from the county, to tell us where they think our gaps are and where we think we can get better, because we know we play a role around public safety, the safety part of this and the cleanup part of this. But I think it is an opportunity where if you have feedback around what we can do and the ideas we can bring, we should be all ears to that too. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Aaron. So let's invite Supervisor Villegas, our former colleague, to say a few words.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I'm planning on saying anything, but I can't help myself. I just want to simply say that the county stands ready, willing, and now able to truly support the city's efforts. I think with the leadership of so many folks that we've identified, Mr. Sawyer, Mr. Shabazz, the police department, Tracy being the lead at the county, we have really, really creative, thoughtful, smart people who want to do good work. It's a very complex problem that's facing communities up and down the state and throughout the entire country. As a representative of the county, now representing the National Association of Counties, it's one of the top issues that counties are addressing. The 3,000 counties nationwide, it's front and center to every community. And so I simply want to just say that, we don't have a lot of resources in the county, but I can tell you that we have really creative, smart people who want to do good work, and that goes a long way. The things that you've put in place the last couple of years really sort of bodes well to that true partnership, city, county, and now, as we know, what Sutter's doing, the private opportunity, the investment from the private, from the business community, from the chambers, and from the hospitals in the Sacramento region is going to go a long ways to helping us sort of meet some of those gaps that you alluded to earlier. So I think I'll leave it at that, unless you have any questions.
Terrific. Thanks so much for your leadership on this.
Thank you.
We had one request for public comment as well. That's by Carolyn Castillo-Pearson, on behalf of the Mercy Coalition.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pleasure being here. See you all. First of all, I do want to say that I just really need to acknowledge Mark Sawyer and the work that he's done. It has been a tremendous difference, I think, here in the community. His rapport with the people that are living out there in the street in the encampments and that sort of thing. I will say that I'm very surprised that he's actually been able to house 64 people, and that's mainly what I wanted to talk about here, is that I want to say probably we're going on 30 years now, we have been doing different studies, different conferences, different surveys, and everything always comes back to West Sacramento, that we don't have housing. Back in the day, we didn't have overnight shelters, we didn't have transitional housing, we didn't have this, we didn't have that. And we're back down to that again today, except for now, policy is more about permanent housing, and we still have a lack of that here. And so I just want to encourage that we, that the resources and forces, come together, that we can begin to sort of build on that. As Supervisor, I want to call him Councilman, Supervisor Villegas has said, we've got a lot of really bright people now that are in the game, and I think that there is a way with collaboration that we can move much further in that. Thank you, Councilwoman Orozco, for your story about downtown streets and what's going on in San Jose, you said? In San Jose. I think that's a perfect example of sort of a community collaboration that could occur. One of the things I also wanted to say is that that is another area that I think really needs to be built on in this. I belong to two different nonprofit organizations, the St. Vincent de Paul as well as the Mercy Coalition. And quite frankly, after Bridge to Housing, we haven't been contacted at all for anything. We've reached out to Tracy, to Mark, to others to see what was going on, where we could be possibly of some service. So I would really encourage staff, hopefully, that we can begin to build some sort of community group. The one that was pulled together for Bridge to Housing worked incredibly well. I think it would be quite an advantage if that were built up again here. I think we could go a lot further. I think there's a lot of resources out there, in-kind resources, whatever, ideas that really aren't being tapped into because of that sort of lack of coordination. And then finally, I just wanted again comment on Measure E. And as a voter, I know.
You got to wrap up.
But as a voter, I thought that I was voting for these taxes to be spent to reduce homelessness. And I just want to emphasize that yes, the impact part is a wonderful thing that's happened here, but that's about encampment, that's about things, but it's the
Apparently, you got to wrap up.
I know.
But
that was it. The homelessness, the issue about the homelessness, reducing the actual impact on the individuals. All right, thank you.
All right, those are all the comments we had on the item. Good. Supervisor Villegas, are you?
Can I just add one thing, because I think this is...
Oh, God, he sent somebody to the county and
I
then
know,
suddenly...
and I won't be back for another year, I promise, but I think this is worth noting. For those who don't know, 2 years after the Bridge to Housing, I know we keep going back to that, but this is significant. 2 years after we embarked on the Bridge to Housing program, 30 of the 38 people who were issued vouchers are still housed today. That's never been done before, ever, anywhere. All over the country, they're talking about that still. How did we manage to keep 30 people? They didn't come to us looking for housing. We went to them, right? And so these are folks from the community who'd been living on average of 5 years on the river. So 30 of the 38 are still housed. That's nearly 80%. So that's a huge accomplishment that was only able to be done given the creativity that the city and the county sort of embarked upon. And so I just want to leave you with that positive note. That's something that we should all be very proud of, so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think and during the Measure E campaign, and whenever we've had community conversations, Bridge to Housing has been a key beacon of, see, it is possible to do something and have an impact. And for me, one of those key lessons is translating what we're doing into outcomes. That's why that works. What we didn't do with Bridge to Housing is say, And look, we collaborated with 16 organizations, and we touched 18 people, and we processed this much paper, and it wasn't that. And so it's the reason why we connected with people's hearts and minds in the community and inspired them to believe that we could do something and it was worth investing in, was that we were able to tell exactly that kind of story. And I think we need to tell the same story on the impact side, but it is those outcomes. And so as we're looking at the table of outcomes, having more of those, I think, is going to be really important. I worry, I mean, as we're coming to a close, I worry because the funding situation is mostly headed in the wrong direction, right? I mean, the president's proposed zeroing out community development block grants and the home program, which will affect both the amount of housing and our ability to meet the needs on homelessness. So we're at the moment when we're starting to feel our oats and getting ready to do big things. So a lot of the resources are going to be heading in the opposite direction. And so it's partly it will mean, keep going back to this table and say, okay, we're all of these outputs, and the investments we put into them essential, are they producing the outcomes that we want for reducing the likelihood and the length of time that anyone is homeless in our community, and the impacts both? Because we're just going to have to get more efficient and more effective at the same time, which is a hassle, and it's hellish. And we've had to do that year after year in West Sacramento, but we may have no choice given what's happening at the federal level. I also think there are resources. I'm also inspired by the Seattle and the San Jose stories. There are resources on the workforce investment side that we haven't deployed here. At the Conference of Mayors, I chair the Jobs and Education and Workforce Committee. We've had there's a lot of social enterprises that are emerging around the country that are kind of a hybrid between a business and a nonprofit. And actually Down the Streets is a good example of one of those. We have virtually none of those social enterprises here in the community or even in the region, but they're eligible for funding through the workforce investment system in addition to the funding that they could get through the housing and homelessness side of the equation. So it may be an opportunity for us to even potentially use some Measure E resources as a way to spark or leverage sources of funding to support that kind of work that would be much larger outside of our traditional housing and homelessness envelopes. Mr. City Manager.
I just wanted to add, I know this council is performance-oriented and looks to the data. Now, Mark Sawyer did point out that in 2017, we did have 87 unsheltered, and that did surprise the folks in the field, and Eric, Jason, and Roger, and the chief who were out there seeing that. We're surprised on that number, but, it was a point of time where we had high water, and we're also, I think, to our credit, we're a lot more sophisticated on our homeless population. So while that number did pop up, I think you also have to recognize the conditions. And one of them is that our police officers are doing an incredible job of making contact. And that is, I think, a key link to them getting services. But a key point that we can't forget is that we've seen crime in this community drop. So as the more contact we have with our homeless population, getting them to get to services, we also have a key indicator of crime, and we've had a discussion with the chief about trying to quantify that to a greater detail and where we can actually put it on a list and link it to this effort. But it is a significant piece, as we talked about, enforcement and public safety, and it is a positive trend. So we have made this a priority. We've got the backs of our police officers. We've got parks and public works that are working with them. It's a priority, and I think that's a key why these indicators are looking positive. We need to get better at it, but simply because in 2017 we had a number of 87, I don't think that should be viewed as a negative. It has to be in context. There was high water that we saw maybe landed on folks that we had not seen before, and as we bring more goats in, that number may go up. We may identify even more encampments, but it's a positive effort. It's a priority for our management team. We all work on this effort, and we are getting better. We recognize that the county is the lead on social services, and working with the Mercy Coalition, more could be done for services, but on a public safety standpoint, this effort is paying a lot of dividends, and it's great work. It's God's work, but at the same time, it's translating into, I think, a reduction in crime.
All right, any other questions or comments on this item? It is, we do have the resolution in front of us, Resolution 1730-30. Is there a motion, Mr. Ledesma?
I would like to move the recommended action.
she said it first, although very, very softly. But so it's been moved by Mr. Ledesma, seconded by Ms. Orozco. Seeing no further discussion or debate, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carried. It looked like we were at the end of the agenda. I was flipping to the last page. All right, thank you very much. I'm sure the Public Works and Community Development departments are not happy with you, but thank you very much for the progress and the work. So now we're going to proceed to item 11. Item 11, which is a public hearing and consideration of Resolution 17-39, vacating a portion of a public utility easement located at 134th Street. Mr. Collier.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you noted, this item seeks your approval of Resolution 1739, vacating a 2-foot wide portion of a 5-foot wide public utility easement at 134th Street. So the affected property is located at the corner of 4th Street and Midstream Lane, and the public utility easement actually runs across the frontage of the property on Midstream. There are no utilities located within the portion of the utility easement that's to be vacated, and all the utility companies and city departments who have interest in the easement were notified of the proposed vacation, and we received no objections. The vacation has been requested by the property owner, Bartis Homes, in order to accommodate a footprint of a home they plan on building on the property. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions at this time? All right, thank you, Mr. Collier. Then we'll open the public hearing on item 11. We don't have any requests to speak, but because it is a public hearing, does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Return to the council for any further questions, discussion, or motion.
I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Ms. Endine. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. That brings us to item 12, which is public hearing to consider objections to the proposed removal of weeds. Fire Marshal Johnson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Back in April of this year, City Council adopted a resolution allowing the fire department to notice property owners who had a history or have issues of weed abatement issues. We've since noticed those property owners and now respectfully recommend to council to open a public hearing to hear objections and or comments regarding those notices. Thank you. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll open the public hearing on item 12. Does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and return to the council. Ms. Endine?
I'll move the recommended action.
Second.
It's been moved by Ms. Endine, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. Item 13 is continued public hearing and consideration of Resolution 17-25, approving the Nexus Study Supplemental Environmental Impact Report, adopting the voluntary I-5 Sub-Regional Corridor Mitigation Program, and amending the Book of City Fees to include the voluntary I-5 Sub-Regional Corridor Mitigation Program.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and fellow council members. My name is Jesse Katkar. I'm an assistant engineer with the Department of Public Works. I'm here to address city council concerns from the previous council meeting on April 5th regarding the voluntary I-5 Sub-Regional Corridor Mitigation Program. There were two main concerns. One was the application of the program to specific plans, and the second being the fee differential between Fee District 1 and Fee District 2, which with Fee District 1 being Bridge District, Washington District, and Pioneer Bluff being higher than the remainder of the city of West Sacramento. So to address the first concern, the application of the program to specific plan areas. Generally, specific plan areas cover a large area, and so they would meet the threshold of 100 a.m. or p.m. peak hour trips for the program. However, it is the ultimate decision up to council whether to include the program within the mitigation monitoring plan for a given specific plan that's not exempt from CEQA. And it wouldn't be a decision made at the staff level, so it'd be a decision made at the city council level. And then to address the second concern, which is the fee differential, what staff focused on was finding a way or following CEQA law to exempt fee District 1 rather than amending or changing the nexus study. And what we focused in on was using Senate Bill 375 and its exemption for specific plans within transit priority areas. And this is actually hinges on the implementation of streetcar and the streetcar stations within Washington, Bridge, and Pioneer Bluff districts, because without that, those areas would not be considered transit priority areas. But because we do have those planned to be implemented by the horizon year of the MTP SCS, those areas do qualify for an exemption. And with that, they would, the specific plans would need to be consistent with the general plan as well as the MTP SCS in order to get that exemption. I believe that covers the concerns that were raised at the previous council meeting. Any comment or questions?
So what if we don't have an MTP SCS and we have an MTP APS? So if we're not able to meet as you know, we're in the midst of negotiations with the State Air Resources Board, we, the region, over what our target for the climate emissions are going to be for the region assigned to the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. If the target gets set at a level that we cannot meet, then under SB 375, the region would not be able to have a sustainable community strategy and would instead be adopting an alternative planning scenario. That's happened nowhere yet in the state, but the proposed targets that ARB is contemplating are not trivially higher than before. So there is a bit of concern that we may not make that, in which case we would lose many of the 375 benefits, and I assume that that's true of this one as well. Is that right?
All right, Jason McCoy, Public Works. I believe the language in the MTP also identifies that, so it's the transit priority area itself wouldn't be a lost benefit. So as long as you're following the guidelines in the existing MTP that say if you're doing a TOD development and you have 15-minute headways with a transit facility, then it is identified as a transit priority area, and therefore this applies. And I think APS, same. I don't believe that the language is any different, but I could look that up.
Okay, could you?
Yeah, I think that's,
It's because it's a pretty significant. I mean, we don't know what the real threat is at this point. I think it's a low-level threat, but it's not an inconsequential one. And at least the way it's been described at SACOG was that if we didn't hit our target, then many of the CEQA benefits of 375 would no longer apply in an alternative planning scenario. I just don't know, whether this was one of them or not. But
I can't tell you with certainty.
Okay. Are there other questions?
No, that was our questions from last time.
Okay, maybe while the public hearing's happening, we can think of an answer here, or Mr.
Maybe
Tuttle?
Denix knows this, but if the issue on the mitigation plan is led by Caltrans, and they've determined that the Bridge District is a transit priority area, it's my understanding they blessed the fact that mitigation would not apply.
That is correct.
So I think it's pretty straightforward.
Well, they don't have that authority. It's not a question of whether Caltrans designates it as a TPA. It's whether or not it is to have access to the CEQA, to not be covered by the requirement under CEQA. You have to have this designation through your SCS under 375. It's not a discretionary action for Caltrans.
It was my understanding that the mitigation plan, the voluntary mitigation plan by Caltrans would not apply to a transit priority area. So I thought it was that straightforward. That was the question that was asked, correct?
Yes.
And we got an approval from Caltrans.
But Caltrans answering that question in the context of an SCS, because Caltrans doesn't designate the TPA. It's the SCA which designates the TPA.
Right.
The question is whether the TPAs, and the reason why this works is not that Caltrans is agreeing to do something, it's that SB 375 CEQA exemption that applies to GPA means you don't have to go, there's nothing, Caltrans is not involved in the first place, so there's no fee to be paid. It's not that Caltrans is by its own grace giving something to the project, so it doesn't really matter what their interpretation is. It's whether or not the 375 benefit applies in the case of an alternative planning scenario. I mean, it's a pretty easily answerable question. It's just I don't know that any of us could answer it right on the fly.
Mr. Mayor, is it possible that we move forward with the public hearing, adopt it pending that, pending the finding of that, and then if it's no, it comes back to us? Could we do that? So because otherwise we'd be continuing it yet another time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, actually, somebody can answer it right away, and surprisingly, it's Charlene Hamilton.
Well, I had to look it up, too. On SACOG's website, they talk about transit priority projects and transit priority areas, and it says that that a transit priority project or area must be consistent with the general use designations, density, building intensity, and applicable policies specified for the project area in either an SCS or APS, for which CARB has accepted an MPO's determination that the SCS or APS would, if implemented, achieve greenhouse gas reduction targets. So I think it'll work in both cases.
Okay, so but if we do it the way that Councilmember Sandine said, then we can be rock
Can be
solid,
sure.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
Makes sense. Great, thank you. All right, then let's open the public hearing on item 13. Does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing. Ms. Sandine?
I'll move that we adopt the resolution pending the
Determination.
finding
As
as the mayor
determination by the city attorney that,
Determination. That sounds better. Determination by the city attorney.
I'll second that.
Yes.
okay.
I think that'll work.
I'll second that.
Okay. All right.
Right. And then
Any
we
further-
will send you a memo indicating one way or the other.
Okay.
What the answer is.
Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. All right, now item 14, which is a workshop on the water and sewer connection fees. Mr. Lundberg.
Good evening. Tonight's our second workshop on the water and sewer connection fees. Back on April 19th, we gave you kind of an overview of what the fees are now, what the factors were in developing those fees, and how we would approach the update. And so, simply said, tonight we're going to come back to you with both some recommendations on some changes to the structure that we will be recommending to you, and also a couple of policy considerations. So with that, I'll introduce our consultant, John Farnkopf from F&H Consulting, who's going to kind of go through a PowerPoint, and then after that, I'll have some brief comments on some policy considerations for you.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Mayor and members of the council, good evening. These are the areas I'd like to cover tonight. It's really just going to be an extension of what we talked about on April 19th, where I gave you some background, my understanding of the legal requirements, described the fees to you, talked about the study approach. So now to continue here, this is, you know, what we're doing with connection fees is we're trying to recover the costs of facilities that provide the capacity, as well as some additional vehicles and equipment, corporation yard and land. This is all what you need. It's either the actual pipes and pump stations and treatment facilities, as well as the sort of the secondary support facilities that are required to make those facilities run. There are some adjustments, though, that we would recommend. Here, I touched on these, I think, quickly at the April 19th meeting. Take them a little bit farther. Right now, we mentioned to you that if you're going to build capacity with borrowed dollars, what you should do is you should make sure that you recover the cost of financing. And so rather than build in the construction cost to recover that cost in the connection fee, we instead would look at the cumulative retired debt service as something that ratepayers should be reimbursed for. And that, because it includes financing costs, can become fairly significant over time for facilities that are debt funded. But that's how we would handle those. The cost of construction is not the only cost associated with providing that capacity. You have to take care of those facilities over time. You have to keep them in good repair. And there are even other sort of secondary economic costs associated with capacity, such as the carrying costs of the capital. You, in effect, are asking ratepayers to spend money now to provide capacity for growth at its convenience later to connect to, and there's a cost associated with that. Those dollars could have been used otherwise, and what we try to do is recover that by not deducting depreciation from the value of those facilities. When we do this, we look at how that affects the fee, because that can be a fairly significant component, but you have some options there on just how much you want to recover in those post-construction costs. Contributed capital, the third item here, in-tract facilities. These are facilities that are paid for by the developer when they construct subdivisions, and they only serve those subdivisions. If they have any extra capacity for any other adjacent subdivisions, those costs would be recovered by the developer through reimbursement fees, which are really separate from connection fees. So those facilities, those in-tract facilities, are not providing capacity for anybody other than who is in that subdivision, and those facilities have been paid for by the developer, and we don't want to include them in the fee and double count them, in effect. We are also, for a water system, we would include the customer meters and the pipe or the service that connects from the main to each customer. On the sewer side, the sewer laterals that allow their wastewater to flow to the public system. We wouldn't include those either. Those facilities don't provide capacity for anybody other than the individual customers. Construction work in progress, which can be quite significant if you get some big projects going, are building facilities that aren't finished and aren't yet providing capacity, and so we wouldn't recommend including that. Any capital reserves also, I mean, that is a cost that ratepayers have contributed. It's sitting there waiting to be used, but again, it hasn't been used yet. It's not providing, it hasn't constructed facilities that are providing capacity, and so we wouldn't recommend including that. So in doing this, we want to make sure that ratepayers recover their costs that they provide in making capacity in the system for growth, but we also want to exclude any costs that are not related to providing capacity. Now, we looked at greater detail at the structure of the water and sewer connection fees. I think you have these tables in your staff report. I simplified it a little bit, but there are 5 items here. Your charges, you have what are called domestic charges, or charges for domestic customers. They're based on meter size, and we like that. That's really the most straightforward way to do it. I would not recommend that you change that. The relationship between the higher meter sizes and the lower meter sizes, I think we just want to confirm that. We want it to be consistent with the water rate structure also. The second item, multiple dwelling units. I think this is a vestige maybe of a time before a lot of your residential customers maybe were metered. Now that you're metering these customers, any new customers that are coming on are getting meters, and I don't really see the need to charge the multifamily customers per dwelling unit. The aggregation of dwelling units in the form of an apartment, they'll have one service. That service requires capacity, and it's sufficient to charge the multifamily based on the size of their meter, the size of their connection, the way you do all other customers. That will simplify things a little and maintain consistency among all customers. There's no basis really for having a separate class of connection fees. Capacity is capacity. Basically, say a 1-inch service provides the same capacity to any customer who's connected to it, regardless of what customer class they are. So I would recommend that you just go on one set of graduated connection fees based on meter size. Your commercial fire services, right now, there's one charge regardless of the size of the fire service that's equal to the 3/4 inch domestic charge. I think that's fine. I wouldn't change it. It's very simple. Accessory dwelling units, there's a new law out there that changes a practice. In the past, it was pretty common if there were these accessory dwelling units are either an additional or an attached unit that's added to existing living space or a detached unit. Those accessory dwelling units were often charged the same capacity fee as the existing structure that was there, an existing single-family structure. They're typically much smaller, these accessory dwelling units, and now the law says that you need to, for living units that are 1,200 square feet or less, you need to prorate the fee based either on square footage or on fixture units. I think in this case, the staff is reviewing it, but you have a fixture unit charge on the sewer side. This is item 5 here. I would recommend having a fixture unit charge for water connection fees, and that would give you the basis also of determining the accessory dwelling unit connection fee. So if you follow these recommendations, what you would end up with is a single set of graduated connection fees. There would be no distinctions between customer classes, and they would just be proportioned on the size of the capacity associated with each connection, and that would give you the basis then also for setting the connection fees for the commercial fire service, the accessory dwelling units, and the charge per fixture unit. On the sewer side, with the sewer structure, currently you have a charge per dwelling unit for single-family customers. It provides the standard flow that is associated with that is 235 gallons per day. We think that you really don't have much choice. This is a good way to go, a charge per dwelling unit for single-family customers. The 235 gallon per day figure is something we want to confirm with the master plan engineers and city staff, but that looks like a pretty good figure. For multiple dwelling units, item 2 here, you charge them based on bedrooms, and it's a rational way to do it. What we did was we looked at what Sacramento Regional is doing. They have a simpler approach to this, and they just have a 75% factor that they use for all multifamily dwelling units. We'll show you some data in a minute that shows how that factor compares with what some other agencies are doing. It's a pretty reasonable factor, I think, all in all. It's a tiny bit below what you have for a one-bedroom unit, but it would simplify things a little bit to go to that. For commercial and industrial, you have a charge per 1,000 square feet based on land use type. It's a little more complicated than it needs to be. Here, your fee now is really only for the collection system and not for treatment, so the strength of wastewater doesn't matter too much, and that lets you simplify things. And what we would recommend is that you really just look at the estimated flow for the commercial connection and prorate that against the flow for the single-family dwelling unit. If it's 235 gallons or something like that, that's what we would recommend. I'll just mention as an aside, I'm not sure how city staff feel about it, but SRCSD uses 9,300 gallons a month, which is about 310 gallons a day. It's a higher number. On the accessory dwelling units, I mentioned this. This is something that is being reviewed also by staff. They'll want to keep this consistent with what is done on the water side. You already have a charge per fixture unit. I think it's based on 35 fixture units per dwelling unit. I just recommend that somebody review that, confirm that they're happy with that number. With these recommendations, again, there would be a lot of simplification here. You would have a single charge per dwelling unit, and that could serve as the basis for calculating the connection fees for the commercial, industrial, accessory dwelling units, and fixture unit charge. So last, we have some comparison information that you asked for at the last meeting. Here on the water connection fee here, we're comparing your current fee. We have not completed the analysis yet of what the recommended fee might be. But what we've done here is, I think, look at the usual cities you compare yourselves with. They're ranked from top to bottom, from lowest to highest. We're trying to just briefly indicate the basis for the charge, and then what the charge is for a 3/4 inch meter, and how, in those cases where there's a different charge for multifamily, how that compares with the single family. So you'll see with, say, Sacramento, Elk Grove, they just have a simple set of charges that are graduated based on the size of the meter, which is what we would recommend that you do here. There are other more complex systems that you'll see here. And, you know, these reflect the unique circumstances at each one of these cities since the last time they updated their fees. Sometimes what you see here are the vestiges of a time when they didn't have very many meters. So I think it's interesting that you see so many different practices. And you can see in the stack bar chart, you know, where you fall in the lineup here. You're probably wondering what's going on in Lincoln. Very high fee there. Their fee is two-pieced. They have a local fee, which is in the $6,000 range, and then Placer County Water Agency has a very significant connection fee that they charge on top of that for water supply to their customers. On the sewer side, here are the same 8 agencies, again ranked from top to bottom. For West Sacramento, we're showing 2 charges. One is for the north area and one is for the Southport area. The difference between the two is the charge that SRCSD charges for treatment. It's noted in that footnote there. So that there's a common component for the city's collection system of $3,405. Here, the spread from, well, in this case, Sacramento to Elk Grove is not as wide as it is on the water side. So next steps, we have to complete our analysis. We're still working on getting a little data on the fixed assets, the construction dates. Once we finish the analysis, we'll share it with the staff, get their input, revise it, and then it will come forward. The staff has some presentations they want to make. Again, with the input that we get, we'll revise it and try to finalize it.
All right, questions?
Yeah, and if I could, I just wanted to cover a couple of major policy considerations that we wanted to talk to you about before we come back on June 14th with the final fees for your consideration. One of the issues is that for both water and sewer, there's a 50% credit for connections north of the Deepwater Channel. And so that is something that we would propose be eliminated in the future, except for, you know, there would still be credit provisions if there's a, let's say, an existing development agreement that calls for some type of credit to be issued. And if there's a situation where there was an existing connection at a property and you come in to rebuild, obviously you can get credit for the connection that existed. And then there's also the green building reduction of 10%, which is a credit. And then credits are given all the time where developers have built oversizing and the council's approved a developer reimbursement agreement. So there are considerations where credits would be given, but we would recommend not just having a blanket one of 50% reduction based on geography. Another recommendation would be, you know, in the future, as the council potentially considers negotiated fee packages, as has been done in the past, we would just recommend that staff provide you with an analysis of what the potential impact is to a fund, let's say water and sewer fund, if there is a reduction in the fees paid by a developer as an incentive. It's not to say don't do it, but we'd want to see some analysis of that. And like I said, the green building reduction is a great idea, great to have that 10% reduction where water efficient technology is incorporated into a project. And then John touched upon some, what are the big issues, I think, in his presentation is that, as we factor the value of the system, we look at full replacement cost of the system rather than the depreciated cost. That's a difference from 2005 and 2007. And then, again, for sewer, we do have, let's say, an exemption and a separate fee program for the Raley's Landing properties. We'd recommend that not continue, again, to the extent there's a development agreement that states that there should be a consideration of that. It would still be there, and we'd say that would be something that could be interpreted by the Director of Administrative Services if there's such a consideration. John talked about aligning the sewer methodology with SRCSD in terms of multifamily, going at 75% of the rate for multifamily. And then finally, one of the issues we've looked at with the water fund is that there's been debt, roughly $4.6 million in annual debt service on the bonds that were issued to mainly construct the water and expand the water treatment plant. From 2005 on, you didn't have the water fund paying its fair share of that debt service. And in fact, in 2011, when we came to you to look at an increase in the user rate, it was because connection fees weren't coming in to help with that debt service, and we weren't making the covenants on our bonds. So is there a way that there could be a catch-up provision included in the connection rate for water to account for the fact that there were all those years where it wasn't contributing to the debt service component of the fee? That's something that we'll look at. We haven't made a decision, but it was one of the policy issues I wanted to raise. So with that, I think John and I have made our presentation, and we'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Ms. Orozco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to the sewer connection fee structure related to the multiple dwelling units. And I see the recommendation to follow the regional sanitation methodology, and the justification, I assume, was for simplification purposes, but I just want to better understand why it is that we would go and treat a multiple dwelling unit, regardless of size, at a lower rate than we were previously calculating. What's the justification for that, and what were the practical impacts of making that change?
You want to take that one?
Well, it's my understanding that when developers approach you and they get one charge for multifamily and they go to SRCSD and there's a different charge, that it's kind of a mixed signal that they're getting, and so there may be some advantage to having consistency. If you study this, I mean, you start looking at flow, and I've looked at a lot of agencies who have done it, you will find a variety of differences. We may have talked even a little about this back on April 19th. The occupancy, well, typically multifamily dwellings are smaller. They may not have their own laundry facilities, not as many bedrooms. And so you might expect to just see less flow being used. There are fewer occupants there, but in some situations where housing is scarce or socioeconomics dictate, you may have higher occupancy in multifamily than you do in single-family residence. So we've seen, I wouldn't recommend that you charge, like 1.25 times for a multifamily, but if there is really a serious concern about that, you could conduct a study, to maybe get a better handle on this. What you're doing right now is rational. I mean, there's a rational basis for it. You charge less for smaller multifamily. I think the issue here is that it's different from the regional SAN. I guess developers wonder who's right, why are there two different ways. Moving over to regional SAN is probably easier than expecting them to do what you're doing. So.
Well, do we know what the difference would be in making this change in a practical?
Dollar-wise?
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
I just had one other question. Could you educate me as to why it is that we had the credits on the north side as opposed to, and was there some rationale behind that?
Well, I wasn't there at the time, but I could harbor a guess, which is, in the north side of town, years ago, in fact, even before the city was incorporated, you had a number of assessment districts that were created to put in sewer infrastructure and water infrastructure. And, if I go back and look at previous iterations of the master plan, going back to 2001, 2002, those are all listed. And so I think they were giving credit for capacity that had been built at that time. And that's the logical explanation. I think there may have been an incentive component as well. Maybe, the north side of town, there'd be a bit more of incentive for infill development. Could be a combination of the both.
I was here then. 2001, 2000. Yeah, it was both of those things. I mean, so, prior to incorporation, the East Yolo Community Services District is the entity that it did a lot of the investments especially the under the ground infrastructure, and that was not at that time, didn't cover the entire current geography of the city. So the investments made in the capacity of the existing the existing infrastructure were not broadly shared across the entire city, because the whole of Southport was not in that district. And there was definitely an interest in providing the right cues that we want to support development in the north part of the city. Development is quite popular, and we had a lot of developers beating down the door at that point in time, ready to build in Southport, and not very much outside of the industrial zone in the north part of the city. So this structure had existed before 2001 and 2002, but it had that fairly long history.
Well, don't we still want those incentives?
I don't know. There was a clearer geographic distinction then than there is today. Between north and south, because, and not just wealth and all of that, but I mean, just the south was rural and brand new for development, and the north was a mix of things. And today the north is more of a mix of things, because you have neighborhoods like the Rivers or the Bridge District or others that are not significantly different than Bridgeway Lakes or other neighborhoods in Southport in terms of the economic status and all of that sort of thing. But it also wraps in all the retail that didn't exist back then. The River Point Center, where we were just trying to get any retail in the city at all back when this was done, and now we're a destination for retail. So it's hard to say. The north-south distinction accounted for a lot more back then than it does today, or there's a lot more variability within the north and within the south than there was at that time. But I did write, when you're making the presentation, the question around not so much the big developers and not the industrial zone of the city, but when you have, somebody opening up an ice cream shop in an old, in a thing that used to be something different, and it had a connection, but now it needs a slightly bigger connection, and how much, so are we doubling the connection fee essentially on that sort of project? It was kind of where my head was going, so it was more around the kinds of projects that would be affected by the 50% reduction, as opposed to keeping it, because it makes no sense to keep it for a big industrial factory that's going to be in the north half of the city. That there's no reason for there to be a 50% credit for sure, or for some major master plan development by a global developer. It makes no sense. But in terms of some of those kind of smaller organic pieces, I mean that was intended to incentivize that, and I don't know how much of those kinds of projects would they get caught up in a significantly higher fee.
And I worry, and that's the part I worry about, unintended consequences. I get, I'm thinking of the Washington neighborhood where there's some infill projects coming in, or they have to reconnect with bigger, all of a sudden how would those be impacted? They wouldn't get the 50% credit today. So I'm not saying yes or no to your policy decision yet. I just need to know kind of when that would apply, what the numbers will tell a tale, what it is today versus what it would be. And that's the part I worry about, is just, I first and foremost get the concept of we have to pay for this infrastructure, and this is by modifying this. I remember in 2011, one of the first meetings I had as council member was you telling that same exact story, like we we're not getting all the rooftops we thought we were getting, therefore connection fees aren't coming in, and we had to do a rate change, right? Is that?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember that conversation. So now we're at the point where, okay, now let's get the rate connection right to pay for what has to happen. But I just need the devil will be in the details when we see what that will mean for those types of projects, be it the ice cream shop or the small retailer that comes in and, in an infill where it's already hard to do. And maybe there's another way we can get at that. I think you mentioned there could be I don't know, be more strategic with how you manage that. But that's the only part I worry about, because this is a different landscape today.
Yeah, if I could, one of the issues that came up today that maybe we didn't get into a lot of detail was accessory dwelling units. And one policy decision could be to support infill where you have, granny flats, as we call them, is there could be just an exemption from any kind of a water sewer impact fee, or it could apply to traffic, parks, and others in order to kind of incentivize that type of infill project. You could always craft another policy that would have infill incentives in terms of impact fees, and not just water and sewer again, that could apply to different types of projects, that you're trying to get to come into a neighborhood like Washington. And so certainly when finance staff are recommending that we get away from a blanket reduction that doesn't have a nexus, that doesn't mean that, there wouldn't be another alternative, which is a more focused incentive program in terms of infill.
Just all has to add up, right? No matter what, we can't just not charge as much, and then, because the general fund's not available to make up the difference. And we can't charge anybody more than their fair share. So we can do a little bit of not charging people exactly their full fair share, but we can't do too much of that. Otherwise, we won't be able to meet the infrastructure needs. Right? And that's our fundamental challenge. And so, of course, our consultant would like a system that's perfectly rational. And our system today has got a lot of, historical irrationalities in it, which I think, so getting most of the way down the field of making it more rational without necessarily trying to achieve absolute perfection for some of these reasons. But we also, I think that, the proposal you have in here around if there's going to be an incentive package, which gets kind of at the same question, that you'd have to give us a report or something about what the impact would be. Think about that a little more between now and our next meeting, because imagine what the format of that report's going to be, and what is it likely to say about it each one at a time. Because I imagine what actually would get attached. You'd give us a thing, and you'd say, here is here's our $5 billion water investment program over the next 25 years, and this project is requesting, or Aaron Laurel's requesting a fee credit of $25,000 on it, and then what will happen is what council will say, well, that's only $25,000 out of $6 billion, right? To some extent, the report may actually make it less likely that we would stick to the discipline that we need, because it's actually the accumulation of all of those that causes it. And so just the single flagging it at each one actually is a reminder that each one is not that consequential to the total. So I'm not opposed to it. I'm just encouraging you to think about city council cognitive effects in terms of how we're evaluating this, so that because the point's exactly right. We need to remind ourselves constantly it's a zero-sum game. It's got to get paid for somehow. But I'm not sure that mechanism is necessarily going to get exactly what you want.
And I'm sorry if I may. Another question on this is the catch-up provision that you're asking for. And I'm kind of, what I'm trying to get at, we have to pay for what we didn't already, right? So so I'm just trying to get a gauge of what that looks like as well. How much of at a real monetary nominal perspective, what is that going to end up at on each household or each meter? And you may not have the answer now, but because kind of what I'm envisioning when you come back is a percentage of what we're doing is let's make it 10% of whatever every dollar we raise is going towards the catch-up provision. That's the part that I need to see, because I don't know how much you say there's a significant amount. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, and we just wanted to raise the concept today. We don't have the math on, well, what was the gap annually from 2005 to now, and how would that equate to some increase in the connection fee? We're working on that, but we just wanted to at least raise that as an issue that we were looking at. We may disregard it entirely, but it's just an issue that we've been trying to grapple with.
But you will come back with that math, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson?
Thank you. So the sewer connection fees, does that include the decommissioning now? I know we talked about that the last decommissioning of the old facility.
It does. We didn't get into detail on the projects that we're looking at that are part of the set that you're buying into, but we are including decommissioning as a package of those projects. And one of the issues was, what's the true cost of the decommissioning? So we basically took the value back, in the early 2000s, and we did a 5% escalator on those costs. And so we're at, I think, $13.5 million in terms of what that cost would be in today's dollars.
Yeah, so it's more the, maybe along the lines of Councilmember Ledesma. When you look at the chart on the comparative charts between the water hookup and the sewer hookup, we are now looking at being at the higher end of the region. And I think, for my purposes, I'd like to be able to simply explain to people why we're more expensive. And it could be, for example, the catch-up provision in there. It could be the decommissioning, but, why is Sacramento, that's theoretically hooked up to the same sanitation district, $2,000 a month, and we're $7,000? So, but people are going to ask, and I think we need to have some simple explanation of why it's so much more expensive.
Yeah, and we've been talking about that. I mean, why we've been looking at the chart in recent days, and the water system, why is that so much higher? And one explanation is that we've got that debt component because we built the water treatment plant to have so much capacity that we have not been using, but we bought it and we built it, and so folks are buying into that. But no, we will provide more information on where we are, comparable cities, and why.
Yeah, and kind of a breakdown, like Councilmember Ledesma was saying, components of the difference be helpful.
Andy?
And I think, following along to Councilmember Johannesson's comments, I think that would be really helpful, especially when this goes to, it looks like it's going to Environmental and Utilities Commission and also the Chamber. I think when you just look at the numbers, we want to be competitive. At the same time, there's a lot that goes into that figure. So I think deconstructing that a bit for those two groups, so they don't just say, oh, we need to go, let's go lower, when we actually do have to pay for we have to make it work.
Thanks. All right, so this was a workshop only. We've received a report. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, so we'll see this soon. Item 15 is a workshop on the Public Agencies Post-Employment Benefits Trust administered by Public Agency Retirement Services, PARS. Mr. Wright.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Should have had dinner during closed session. This will be very short, given the time of evening. We have with us Mitch Barker, who's the Executive Vice President of PARS, and Andrew Brown, who's the Senior Portfolio Manager for Highmark Capital. So if there are any detailed questions that I can't answer, excuse me. So staff presented this concept of the PARS Post-Employment Benefit Trust back during the council retreat. I just wanted to have a quick workshop to see if I can push the right button here. Oh, that's, no, you want to do it? Go ahead. All right, so there's different parts of the trust. This is going to require, there we go. So there's two parts of the PARS trust. There's the other post-employment benefit portion of the trust, and then there's the pension portion of the trust. And so this is one of the only, in fact, that I know of, trusts that actually does both post-employment benefits and pension. Currently, we have our trusts with CalPERS, both for the OPEB with what's called the CERBT. This is the PERS program for paying basically our unfunded liability for retiree health. And then for pension, we have multiple trusts. We have the police safety, the fire safety, and the miscellaneous safety. So why would we think about adopting another trust? The answer is really fairly simple. Number one, PARS has significantly more options to diversify our portfolio. Number two, it's much more of a full-service approach. They have people available. They meet with you. They come here. They've got cell phones. You can talk to them. Anybody who's tried to do that with CalPERS knows it's a little bit more difficult unless you have a contact where you can talk to them directly. And then finally, most importantly, we looked at the performance of PARS over the last 1, 3, and 5 years, and almost universally, even with the higher fees that they charge, so net of fees, the return that PARS was getting is higher than what we're getting from CalPERS. So that's the reason that we would look at it. The pension portion, as the council is well aware, we are looking at significant increases in our PERS pension over the next 5 to 7 years and then ongoing. And so adopting this trust, even if right now we don't have money to put into the pension portion and we could put money into the OPEB portion, if there comes a time where we have some additional revenue, we could put some money into that pension portion of the trust so that in a year where PERS goes up more than our general fund can pay for without affecting services, you could reach into the trust and use some of that money to have it have less of an impact. And so since the PERS, the ramifications of these PERS increases are increases for 5 years going forward and then staying at that same level for 20 years, and as we continue to look at opportunities for growth in the city, as we have those opportunities, having this trust will allow us an avenue of putting that money away. The only other option, it would be simply giving lump sum payments to PERS to build down our liability. And then lastly, the recommendation, if council gives staff direction to move forward with the adoption of this trust, which is, we would come back either at the next meeting or 2 meetings from now, get it adopted, and then we have our payment that we're getting ready to make, our annual required contribution that we make normally to PERS, and staff would then recommend at that time how much of that payment we would make to CalPERS, because we're not eliminating the CalPERS trust, and how much we would make to the PARS trust. Staff's recommendation is essentially we're going to put money in both and see how the performance is for a few years. If PARS continues to perform better, we might come back to the council and say, let's move all the money to this trust. If they don't, then we could obviously move the money back to the CalPERS trust. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Mr. Barker or Mr. Brown would as well, if you have any.
Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson.
Just a quick one. On the diversification, so what, there's always a risk, whatever the investment strategy you have. So basically, the idea would be to do this over two years or so, and look at the returns at that point. So I guess the concern is if it's, risk tolerance.
Sure.
This type of thing.
Well, number one, what we're allowed to invest in is controlled by the government code, and so we can't get too crazy. No derivatives and things like that. So Mr. Brown could address more detail, but they have 5 different strategies ranging from most conservative to obviously the least conservative, none of which are radical departures from what we're doing now, and none of which are obviously violate the government code requirements.
Is it that same strategy that the city goes by when it makes its investments? Same.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The city investment policy would still apply.
Right.
Mr. Ledesma?
I'm thinking, go ahead.
So the management fees and which you say you expect or anticipate would be offset by a higher performance level, Are those, are they actually offsetting in cash? I mean, are we paying more, but the balance, you expect our assets to grow by a larger amount?
Correct. I believe that, Mr. Brown, that's a correct statement, correct?
So, but how does it get scored in our spending? Or so are we writing a check for a management fee out of our regular general fund budget?
Right. No, I do not believe we are writing a check. They're taking the money out of the investments.
Okay.
Making sure I have my experts behind me to make sure they're nodding up, not this way.
And that's kind of where I was gearing towards. Where's the risk on our side from a liability and non-performing year? So again,
Sure. Well, the risk is that we put money in and the return on it, net of fees, is less than the return we would have gotten had we had put the same money in CalPERS.
Right.
And so we've, obviously we when we looked at this, we brought CalPERS in. CalPERS did their presentation to my finance management team, and so did PARS. So we didn't look at just one or the other. We looked at both. CalPERS clearly presented to us these incredibly low fees, and that was their big selling point. And when PARS came in, we looked at their fees, and what their selling point obviously is they said, look, even net of fees, we outperformed them in 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, for the last 5 years. And so based upon their performance, net of fees, it seemed like it was worth at least exploring that and taking a look at that. And then with the addition, I think what really turned it for our staff was the pension aspect, because there is no other program other than just giving PERS your money. And so the ability, if we can, as the revenue starts to increase in the city, our ability to put some money in there for a rainy day fund and that can't get grabbed for any other purpose, because once it's in there, it's in the pension stabilization portion of the trust, and it can only be used to make pension payments. So it controls staff's desire to grab it, excuse me, or the council's desire can only be used for that one purpose. Seemed like it would be a responsible financial move on behalf of the city.
And these are expense dollars that are already being scheduled for personnel, for PERS purposes. So the part, I'm trying to reconcile it, because this is a bit foreign to me, and not the trust service,
right, but
our budget dollars going to them. And as you said, on the years where PERS, where you would have to just make a payment to them one way or the other. I'm thinking of two things: opportunity costs. Those are costs that we're paying anyway.
Right.
And so, and then the other one is around what happens if they don't meet that threshold. And we still have a PERS payment to make, and we don't have that cushion anymore, right?
Okay, so putting money in the PARS pension portion of the trust does not change any of our obligations to PERS. We're making our PERS payments, so we'll make our PERS payments in 2017, 2018, 2019. But if in 2018, we have, let's say we have $300,000 in revenue, extra revenue, and the council and staff recommends we put $300,000 into the pension trust because we know our PERS costs are going to go up $1 million a year. So we put it there, we pay our $1 million in 18, it goes up $1 million in 19, we have $1 million in increases, and we actually have some extra revenue, we put another $200,000 there, it goes up another $1 million, and we only have, it's going to result in a reduction in services if we pay that full $1 million, but if we paid $500,000, excuse me, and we reach back to the trust and say, okay, we need to pull out $500,000 that we put away. It's like like you're putting away money for your kid's college education. You say, okay, we need it now, and we're going to need it to pay $500,000 of that $1 million increase so that it doesn't impact our services. So that's the part, the pension portion.
Yeah, I get it.
The OPEB portion, again, we have an ARC payment every year. And what staff, if council gives the go-ahead to move forward with this trust, what staff will come back with, along with the sort of the legal documents that need to be signed, with a recommendation that we put half of our $1 million with CalPERS trust and half with this trust. and then or maybe put all of it with this trust, and then observe for a year and see how they perform. And if it's, at one point, the performance is clearly better than the other, then we could put the money back to CalPERS or move the money all to PARS. So there's clearly some risk. You know, there was a period of time, when I first became the finance director, where Evelyn Hayden, our prior finance director, said to me, the money in the CalPERS trust was going backwards. She was ready to pull it all out and just put it in a bank account somewhere. So there's a risk either way, obviously.
Ms. Sandine?
So are the only options in this space PARS and PERS? Or are there other options that we should know about when we're making a decision like this?
I'm sure there are other options. I haven't looked at any for quite a while. We looked at option. There's no option that does both the pension and the OPEB. There are other OPEB options other than PARS and PERS that are these types of trusts. We've looked at them in the past, and they've been either extremely cumbersome. Some of them are joint ventures that various cities and counties put together and really require a lot of administrative work. So we've looked at others, and these were the two that really we've brought forward. We could look at others if the council so desires.
I just don't have the background.
Right.
So I saw the list, the addendum on the presentation of the list of municipalities
Right.
that are with PARS, but I didn't know if there were other options we should be aware of.
Certainly, one of the reasons we looked at PARS is because we work with PARS on a regular basis now. They do our
Right.
alternative retirement for our part-time employees. They helped us during the recession, as you know, with trying to get through some of these. So we've worked with the organization in the past, and that's certainly part of it.
All right, this is a workshop only. You have
Move
sufficient-
forward?
It's a workshop only, so
Okay.
we can't say.
No, all right. I got my direction?
I didn't hear any fatal stops.
Okay,
so.
thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That brings us to item 16, which is workshop on West Sacramento Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District Infrastructure Financing Plan.
Yeah, tonight's item is a workshop. We'll have a PowerPoint. Aaron Laurel is also here to support the presentation and answer any questions. But what I'd start out by saying is that since in February, the EIFD Public Finance Authority directed the city to prepare the infrastructure financing plan, we have made progress in kind of doing the big things, generating the amounts of revenue that we believe the district would generate. There's been a fiscal impact analysis. There have been a number of things, and now we're at the point where we're going to bring some policy issues to you. And so with that said, we'll just start into it. Here's a map of the EIFD. It's roughly 4,127 acres, or 28% of the city. It sits entirely within the former boundaries of the redevelopment area. And we've got 14 sub-areas that comprise the district. I want to talk a little bit about tax increment. You know, this one is all familiar, I think, to everyone. You have a base year, and then the growth over that base year is your assessed valuation or your incremental growth. It's going to get weird with the EIFD. That we get a real Christmas cake kind of pattern here, or you know, you get different levels. So the bottom two layers in orange and red are 1987 and before. That was the base for the redevelopment area. The next three are under redevelopment now with RDA dissolution. You have a large portion going to the taxing agencies and the successor agency to pay for enforceable obligations. You have what we call the residual distribution, which is right now about $3.5 million annually, with $2.5 million going to Measure G projects, and about $1.25 million of that going to the city's general fund to pay for administrative functions. And then there's about 10.2% that comes to the city, goes into the general fund, and that's from some pass-throughs that existed under redevelopment and continue. And then the top three layers are what you're adding with the EIFD. So in an EIFD world, you're going to have, again, a portion going to the taxing entities. You're going to still have a contribution to the general fund, and then finally, the portion that goes to the EIFD. And that's through 2037. When the redevelopment area goes away, everything changes. You have a base, which is the base prior to 2016, 2017, which is a new base year, and that's split 48% to the city general fund, 52% to other taxing entities. And then you have a similar split, for the EIFD revenue. You'll have about 48% coming back to the city post-2037. In terms of revenue projections, these are just gross numbers, but we wanted to show you what we were coming up with, give you a preview of it. So about 5 years into the plan, you would be generating, in 22, 23, you'd see an annual flow of about $6.3 billion, and again, that's based on development projections that may or may not occur, but that's what we're showing in our analysis. Going out to 27, 28, about 14.3 annually, and 32, 33, 15 years in, you're at about 20 million, and that's close to a build-out scenario in terms of the land use that we're looking at with those areas. In terms of how that works out in terms of cumulative revenue, what we want to show you is that there are certain numbers if you decide to budget 100% of that revenue to the EIFD. For instance, in 22, 23, you'll have accumulated 24.3 million. But if the council decides to budget less, 18.2 million. So there is the option of at certain years, the council may decide not to budget as much and hold monies back into the general fund. And I'll talk about that more, but we think that that's a strong kind of concept to have incorporated into the infrastructure financing plan, this idea that the allocations are going to vary potentially from year to year depending on other council priorities. But, cumulative tax increment right now, it looks like it'd be about 1.2 billion going out to 2064, 65. And so the term of these EIFDs is about 45 years from the date that the council authorizes the issuance of debt, and we're assuming that that would occur in about 4 years from the formation date. In terms of where we are again in the formation process, we're at step 4, and we're anticipating that we would complete the plan in the next couple weeks, and then we look at it coming back to the council on June 14th for an adoption of the plan. The components of the plan might be familiar to you already. We're the first enhanced infrastructure financing district, so there are not a lot of examples, but the city did in 2014 approve the formation of the Bridge District IFD, and it's in some way the plans are similar. You've got, in addition to the kind of description of the district in terms of the boundaries, what the authorized facilities are, you have a goals section. You have your tax increment projections, plan of financing, including the debt that you would issue. You described that in the document. And then you would have a limit on the number of dollars that may be allocated to the district. And you could choose a max. You could choose that 1.2 billion number. It doesn't mean that you have to use it, but you would leave the option of maxing out the amount that comes to the EIFD. There is the analysis of the fiscal impact. This is very important to ensure that formation of the district identifies the potential impacts on the city's general fund, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then one of the components is an identification of replacement housing plan for projects that are funded by the EIFD that could result in the displacement of housing. And these provisions, I would say, are somewhat similar to redevelopment. They're not too different from what you used to have to do if redevelopment dollars were used to remove housing. So, you know, in the fiscal impact analysis, we're evaluating service costs going out, again, to like 2065. We're going to look at how much of the EIFD revenues could be, you know, programmed without having an impact on the city's general fund and municipal services. And that will help inform, you know, issues about, you know, allocating tax increment in terms of the maximum. You know, and we'll have some estimate of what we think at various points in the project. You know, issues where, let's say, services, effect on services would be an issue, and you might want to program less. So it's going to vary by year, and so we're going to try to identify that to the extent we can. And then, you know, we're going to look at, you know, the service cost is a big one, and the impacts on the general fund. And the methodology that we're going to use is kind of a per capita approach. So as we look at the cost of city services, we look at what it costs on a per capita basis currently for a resident or an employee within the city, and then we kind of look at what the per capita generation will be from future development, and then we apply our cost factors, and it's the same methodology that we used in the Bridge District IFD. And so right now you're looking at tax increment generated by the district either being at 31% of each dollar up until 2037 and 48% after that. There is the option that the city could allocate VLF fees. Those currently go to the general fund. We're not advocating that. I just pointed out that it's an option under the statutes that the city could contribute that. And then the city could also contribute Measure G funds. And while we say $2.25 million per year, we're assuming we would continue to have that $1.25 million go into the general fund to support administration. And the revenues, again, that wouldn't go to the district, just to be clear, any sales tax or use tax revenues, TOT, any existing fee or permit revenue. It would just, the only one that staff would consider recommending would be something that could be allocated, and this could be a policy in the document, is Measure G. And so I just wanted to go through, I've got 2 slides here that are some of the key policy considerations, and I think what we heard from the council last time we were here in last November was that policies would be good to incorporate into the document. And we looked at the areas where something meaningful could be put in there, and budget policy is one. And so what we'd be recommending is that the city council would make a decision in the approval of the biennial budget or any annual adjustments. The city council would recommend how much would be budgeted to the EIFD. There would be a special revenue fund where those funds would be placed. And should the council decide not to allocate 100%, if you want to allocate 25% a given year, let's say, you know, we have a recessionary situation like we had in 2008, 2010, the city council could make that decision. And so 25% would go into the EIFD, 75% would go into the general fund. So as a policy, we want the council to be able to do that. You would still, under the current statutes, the PFA would have a role in approving the budget for the EIFD funds, but whether it's 25% of an allocation or 100% of the allocation, that's really the council's purview, and the PFA would just decide and approve the budget of how those funds are used. So that's one important goal. Another one would be just having goals and objectives for the EIFD, and as you see in your agenda report, we took largely policies that came out of the Community Investment Action Plan. We thought those were really good goals and objectives to include. I think we added a couple, one being the issue of community-wide significance, and it would be a policy that you would adhere to that. There would have to be a community-wide benefit, and that just comes out of the statutes. And another one, I believe, was just that there would be the potential to leverage assessment districts and benefit districts that could be formed if they were combined with the EIFD revenue. And that's similar to some of the deals that the city has approved in the past for both Raley's, for the Raley's landing area and for the River Cats Stadium. We would obviously establish a cap on the amount of revenues that would be collected. And again, you know, it would be good to have direction. We could pick a max amount. We could take everything, 100% we think that could be collected. We could assume that a maximum amount of Measure G funds are contributed to the EIFD, and that could be our max. Or it could be just EIFD revenues without Measure G, or it could be, you know, something less than 100%. But that's something that needs to be into the document. And then right now, we have an EIFD project list. The project list has to show that you're going to be able to expend all the funds you collect. And, working with various city departments, we started with a 2-year and 5-year CIPs, and then we looked at projects that were coming out of the 20-year kind of window of the general plan update. And so we came up with $1.5 billion worth of projects. So we have no problem spending that money. And again, the thing about revenue collection is that the reason we're doing the EIFD largely is so that we could bond and capitalize an income stream. So right now, we're showing that using that max $1.2 billion, that would generate about $550 million in bond proceeds. So that gives you an idea. If we have $1.5 billion in projects, whether it's pay-go or bond revenues funding a portion of those projects, we can spend the money. Real quickly, just kind of wrap this up. There has to be a date when the district ceases to exist, and so that could be 45 years from the authorization of the issuance of debt or the authorization of any city loan to the EIFD. We're not recommending there ever be a city loan to the EIFD, but that's what the statutes say. So at a minimum, we're looking at something like 2065, and we'll probably have some backup date, 99 years out. You've got to have that in there. And, clearly incorporated in any recommendation will be the outcome of the fiscal impact analysis. And I think being able to adjust the budgeted amount every year is a good way to deal with fiscal impact issues that, could arise in the future. We identify actions not contemplated but are authorized by the statutes. I mentioned just one of them, which is I don't anticipate the City Council is going to want to allocate VLF funds from the general fund to the EIFD. So, we do have a number of things that we've identified that, they're in there, but we're not recommending them. It's just what the statute allows. And finally, we want to recognize that we are going to pursue voter approval. There's a 55% threshold of the qualified electors within the district, which would be the voters within the EIFD, and we'd have to seek their authorization for bond debt. In terms of schedule, what we're looking at is having a PFA workshop May 24th.
Paul, can I just since we have that in front of us and it's also in our document and it's past 10:30, that maybe we proceed to unless you've got more beyond the schedule, but if we can get to the actual policy conversation that you need.
Understood. Mayor, that completes staff's recommendation. We're ready to.
All right, Mr. Ledesma, you want to lead us off as the guru of the post-redevelopment options task force?
Yeah, well, thanks for that.
Author of Measure G.
Yeah, Measure G and all this. But thanks to all of you for the work on this, and we're getting one step closer to being that first one into this strategy in EIFD, and it's and now the kind of rubber's meeting the road, and we're starting to see these policy choices, and which is, I just want to pull back on this because it is something that we are able to look at the project map and see that we're going to be able to continue to leverage these resources for future community benefit all the way to 2065, which I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see all that, but the future councils will and future residents will see the impact of that. And I think they'll be thankful that we thought of this really creative solution to continue our growth and build out amenities and infrastructure for our community, just to make it a better place to live, work, and play. So with that said, on the policy goals and objectives, and I'm trying to, I know that we put these into the original community investment plan, and the one that I just want to highlight is around the number 8, which is induce private investment, or otherwise it not occur. And I guess it gets back to where we go with the project plan and how we target the EIFD to sort of I think what we intended is to really be an impactful tool to spur the next community, be it the western part of West Capitol, I think that's in the map area, or whatever. So I don't think these are in any particular order, the goals and objectives. But I want to make sure we use, while we have all this bonding capacity, not what it was under RDA, but it's pretty sizable given what we have, right? And you have $2 billion projects.
Yeah.
Would that come back to us, what those projects you're anticipating are in the next round of?
No, so in approving the plan, the project list is meant to be illustrative in nature only. It doesn't represent a decision by the council to allocate so much EIFD revenues to any given project. The plan just has to show that we have a way to spend the money.
And we do. Okay, so it isn't, we're not approving it one way or the other. We're just, here's the things we could do that we know are necessary. And I kind of go back to that point of making sure that in there, we're really focused on those areas where, be it, if we have to leverage things for the build out of the western part of West Capitol, or down, continue our, what we now have is really rural growth down in the Pioneer Bluffs area, leverage it for those things, and that's what we anticipated. How are we going to fund that next wave of growth and infrastructure to do it? So hopefully we have examples of projects that will meet that need.
Yeah, if I, excuse me, if I could just comment on that. So the plan will have very specific projects, but it'll also have more non-specific kind of geographical related items, line items, like Pioneer Bluff infrastructure or different geographical areas. Really, it's just as an acknowledgement that that's the type of investment we're looking to do.
Mm-hmm.
So like Paul said, it's illustrative. It's not a menu that you have to choose from, but we, at least with this plan, wanted to show these are the things we're thinking about for the next 45 or longer years.
Right. And then on the policy issue or the recommendation about establish a cap on the revenues, I'm not quite clear if you are advocating a cap, one way or the other.
Well, here's my take on it. The caps were always, I think in the past, arbitrary. You just want a big number that you never hit, because you never know what's going to happen. In this case, if we were to show in the document an allocation of VLF funds, Measure G, and EIFD money just to justify a really high number, that may not be good from a policy standpoint, because the council may not want to see that VLF number in there, for instance.
Right.
I don't think we're going to have any problem showing, with just EIFD revenues, we're at 1.2 billion. Do we need to get to 1.4 billion by showing some number that you might not want to have in there? Or, should we not include, contribution to Measure G as like a default to get to that cap number, but just show EIFD revenues? That's kind of where I was going policy-wise, because I wouldn't want to have anything in the document that the council, didn't want to seem to be endorsing within a document.
And so the document, will the document then codify that we do have a cap? I'm trying to.
Yeah, it will. I
Okay.
mean, the cap that's in there is the cap. And typically, it's going to be pegged on a number that you come up with through your analysis.
I think the theme of a lot of the recommendations is to maintain ultimate flexibility.
I'm getting that sense, and I'm just kind of dancing around it.
Yeah,
but
and
we
on
just
that
wanna
issue,
make-
I think we'd recommend a cap that's as high as possible, but within reason, like Paul said, without calling out that we're contemplating VLF funds, for example. So we have a number that we can derive from that kind of recommendation.
We can be really high with just, let's say Measure G.
Right, gentlemen, the
and-
challenge with the
yeah,
two-person staff report is that you keep volleying back and forth, and it's almost 11 o'clock, so I'm going to try to stay focused at the council where possible, except where there's a question, so.
Okay.
No, I think that is the important part, is to keep the flexibility on it, because I think that's what you're trying to articulate. It's just, maybe it's because it is quarter to 11, I'm not quite getting it. But that will be important, and the fact that we can, on an annual basis, look at it and say, okay, this is how much we're going to allocate this year for these specific things. I think that's what we're going to end up going with, right? So I'll cease from there, and it's late. So I appreciate the work on this and look forward to kind of seeing this in the next few weeks and into next month as we kind of get towards the actual vote on this. So thank you.
Ms. Sandine? I always go to the vice mayor last is the thing, and almost always.
No, I appreciate the two items I circled recommendation for, which we just talked about, which is the cap. And I think getting that to the highest level that makes sense is, I in complete agreement with that. The second one is identifying projected fiscal impacts of the city's general fund, which I think is critical. I think all these elements, and I think it's very well done, but I think that will be critical pieces as this moves forward.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Johannesson?
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly, on the recommendation 2 and probably 5. A lot of this is going to depend, basically creating incentives for private partners or partnerships into the development. So I would think that, there would be some kind of policy about coordinating where possible with the landowners or the development community on whatever the infrastructure is going to be. So you at least have some conversation with that. And also just what we've heard on the cap-to-cap and the use of P3s, to maybe kind of look at federal opportunities whenever that's going to be clarified as a way to augment what we're doing here. And that could involve more relationship building with the private sector on some of these projects.
Great. I agree with all the comments that have been made. It's a strong report. It is, when the voters adopted Measure G, when we put it before them, it was largely intended to not constrain our flexibility, but to definitely set a framework. And so I feel, I just want to plant a yellow flag, because I see you going in the opposite direction fairly aggressively, like as much flexibility in the future as possible. And really, the purpose of this was to create a framework where we weren't subject to our animal spirits each year at the council, right? If that was the goal, we didn't need the IFD in the first place. We could have just allocated the money. But we know the pressures that we're under around allocations of annual, allocations. And that's why we said to the voters, do you think we should be reserving these funds for these purposes in the community investment plan? And it's not that it should be an absolute, under no circumstance should it change, but I would not glorify the notion that every year we could just make an entirely different decision, because we're going to have a long list of projects, and people will be making investments in our city based on the expectation that those projects are going to be happening. Both developers, but also individual people who are opening their ice cream shop or moving here or coming back home after serving in the Army or whatever. They're making those decisions, and so the infrastructure plan that we're developing for it to attract investment at all levels, it has to be for real. And we don't generate the increment if we don't do the development, and we don't do the development if we don't do the infrastructure. That was the fundamental premise of why we had to move forward with Measure G and why we were so successful under redevelopment. And so that you got to be careful with the notion that, well, if we just we could choose to move this $1 billion all over to the general fund. Well, no, we can't, because we don't generate that money in the absence of making these infrastructure investments. So it is not as simple as simply saying, oh, this year we need some more money, so let's not spend it on infrastructure anymore. Which is why also we wanted a mechanism that would allow us to bond, partly to get the money in hand, and also partly to impose some discipline on us in terms of our spending decisions. So the content's not necessarily wrong in that sense. I just want to encourage, I know where we sit right now with the budget, and so we're hypersensitive about the general fund, and we should be, but this is a 35-year game. And if we had taken this same approach pre-redevelopment, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today. It's because we had that mechanism that wasn't optional every year. We couldn't opt in and out of redevelopment each time and say, oh, you know what, and only 20% of redevelopment this time. We couldn't do that effectively before, and we're reaping the benefits of that in our community today. So just a flag to don't take it too far. This is a love letter to the future, essentially, and it should say what we're really intending to do in the structure of how the IFT is going to work. Plus, if we're doing it every year anyway, we're not going to be able to build anything, because it doesn't generate enough money annualized without bonding in order to make much of a dent in our infrastructure needs in any event. So it's going to require much longer-term commitments than a year-to-year allocation anyway. On the goals and objectives, I do think, just not to contradict what I just said, but maybe just supplement it, which is that one of our goals for the EIFD and objectives is to strengthen the tax base that supports essential public services, in addition to the elements that are already out there. So I think being clear that is one of our purposes in the EIFD is helpful to kind of make the case that you were describing. And I'm looking forward to how you describe some of these elements. I know they come from the community investment plan, but another hallmark of our redevelopment strategy, at least in the last decade, has been with almost 100% fidelity, at least 95% fidelity, we don't put money into private development projects. We put that money into the infrastructure and the specific plans and the rest of the things that make private development possible, as opposed to what got a lot of redevelopment into trouble, which was subsidizing one project at a time. And in some respects, it gets to this number 8, which is induce private investment where it would not occur. To me, that's a little bit strong. I'm trying to induce, accelerate private investment, help nudge it a bit. But one of I know for my first 5 years on the council, we were doing a lot of trying to get in private investment where it would not occur. Well, it wouldn't occur because it didn't make sense, and kind of brute forcing it too much can also have its challenges. So it's not critical. It's not going to create a bright line. But in terms of sending signals to the future, which is kind of the conversation we had during the whole charter debate, and this plan hopefully will be deferred to and read by our ultimate successors in 2066, and so it should articulate what the basic vision and framework for decisions is. All right, so this will come back to us then at a future date that you would have
June
described
14th.
if I hadn't cut you off. Thank you, Mr. Blumberg. Thank you, Mr. Laurel. All right, that brings us then to council calendar.
Good evening, or good night, I guess. I have a couple of items for you, Mayor and council members. This coming Saturday at 9 a.m. is the police department's putting on a football clinic at River City High School. The event starts at 9, the program starts at 10 a.m. And then next Friday, May 19th, at 10 a.m. is the West Gateway Place grand opening, and there will be food provided. So, good reason to attend, aside from the actual opening. And that's it for me.
And one way to get to the grand opening will be the bike share system, which is expected to go live on the 18th. And there is a geofence station at West Gateway Place, or immediately adjacent, I believe.
I'll confirm that.
It's on the thing I'm looking at right now, so I think it's there. So that system is expected to launch on the 18th. Any questions on the calendar? City manager report?
No report.
City attorney report? Staff direction from members of the council?
Sorry,
Member
yeah,
Johansson.
just one issue I forgot to mention at the senior resource there. A number of folks were saying that we're not getting close enough to the microphones. And they were asking, would it be possible to have a card in the back that they could say, would you speak up, or would you get close to the mic? Because I think there's a common issue of people sitting in the back and it kind of not being able to hear us. I don't know if there's really much we can do with that, or maybe an announcement at the beginning, or for, we get closer, but it seems to be a small issue.
All right, thank you. And we have no future agenda item requests. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Been moved by Ms. Sandine and seconded by Ms. Roscoe. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.